Good morning. It's on. Nice to see you all. I'm Felicia Marcus, Chair of the Board, and today is Tuesday, November 21st at 9:33 a.m. With me are, to my left, Vice Chair Stephen Moore, to his left, Board Member Doreen Didamo, and to my right, Board Member Tam Dodek. Ms. Hobeck, will you please introduce the staff that are assisting today?
Yes, thank you, Chair Marcus. With me on my left is Chief Counsel Michael Lawfer, and on my right, my Chief Deputies Jonathan Bishop and Eric Oppenheimer. Janine Townsend, Clerk of the Board, is being assisted today by Courtney Tyler.
Great, thanks very much. Nice to see you all, too. Our emergency evacuation procedures, and we have some people who I don't think have been at all of our meetings. If you hear an emergency sounding sound, please gather your belongings and your friends and proceed cautiously down the stairs and out the building. We gather over in Cesar Chavez Park near the corner of 10th and J Street if you want to wait with us. If you need assistance, just let one of us know and someone will escort you to a protected area in the event of that. The meeting is also being webcast and recorded, so please speak into the microphone when you get up there. Don't get so close. I used to tell people to do the rock star thing, but you don't really want to do the rock star thing. You want to be close enough that it picks up so that people on the webcast can hear you, but not so close that it makes sort of a staticky sound for folks on that other end. Hard to know, but do your best. And then, also, if you have any noise-making devices, please set them on silent, stun, off, whatever you prefer. Got that. All right. With that, we're on to the public forum, which is the part of our meeting where we hear from people who want to talk to us about an item that's not on the agenda. We actually have 3 of them today. So we will first have Doug Hefner, followed by Libby Uremovic, followed by Hans-Peter Walter. Mr. Hefner. Morning. Morning. I'm having a hard time with my water permit. I bought a house in Pilot Hill. Thank you. Is it on? Okay.
In Pilot Hill. And a little over a year after we had moved in, I got a notice from the water board saying my permit needed to be paid. I never got a permit. Apparently, I went to building and safety to solve the problem, and they got nowhere with me. I went to my city county supervisor, met with Roger Trout, head of planning, and an attorney, because they've already been sued on this issue and lost. When I replied to your board, my reply was, there is not now, nor has there ever been a lien or encumbrance recorded against the title of my property concerning this permit. I'm not a party to this permit. You are welcome to have access to my property so that you and your permit holder can resolve the issues. I got nowhere with that. So
I don't, what kind of a water permit is it?
This is a pond resulting from a intermediate creek, part-time creek. As a pond was a result of the BLM building a road illegally. And ever since then, they've tried to blame it on the new guy, make him pay for it. So if I could read this that I wrote to my Senator Ted Gaines.
If you'd like, within your time, it's fine, or I can find someone who can actually sit and have a conversation with you about whatever it is, so you could actually talk to.
Well, I'd like to solve the problem because now you've taken money out of my bank account illegally. You haven't gone through the due process of law. I don't hold a permit. There was nothing recorded against my property, but because each agency is trying to cover for the next agency, the fire department says, yeah, we need a pond for a parcel map split. When there was a fire on the property, they went down the street to a swimming pool. They wouldn't use the pond. When I had the current fire marshal there, he said, no, our equipment can't utilize the water in your pond. So we know that the fire protection part is a joke, but it became an issue, a condition of approval for the parcel map split. When that first party went through the process for $80,000, $90,000, he got tired of it. He sued El Dorado Hills, and won. Then on a remainder parcel that was going to be split, my property, they made that woman do the same thing. She was in her 80s. She didn't know up from down. Yeah, whatever. Her son was building the house for her. There was a mass confusion. But then when she died, for years, nobody paid the permit. But now when I buy the house, magically it's due again. So we need to fix the problem because it's not my permit. I'll tear out the dam that's creating the pond if you want, but then Dr. Henneberry won't be able to get home. Not my issue. That's the title company issue. Or we can just declare the pond as an appurtenant feature of the landscape. And Roger Trout said, if the water board's good with it, I'm good with it. They don't want to be sued again. They know they're going to lose.
All right. This is not something we can resolve here. All I can do is get somebody to actually sit down and talk with you about it.
I'd love it. How do we do that?
All right. Eric, can you, this is Eric Oppenheimer, who's the Chief Deputy over water rights, and I'm not scanning the audience for water rights. Where's Eric? Okay, go talk with Eric, and the Erics will figure out somebody who can like just look at it and help sort it out.
Thank you.
No, of course. All right, Ms. Uremovic, hi.
Never solved my problems in 5 minutes. This is J.F. Shea. This
Right.
is every invoice I can find out of the bonds that paid to J.F. Shea, every invoice out of the city of Beaumont. $22 million for Beaumont Sewer Plant. Not one invoice. Not one. All they did was send in spreadsheets that the city made inside of the city. We know that Urban Logic was operated inside of the city. We know that General Government Management Services was operated inside of the city. And we know that Beaumont Electric was operated inside of the city. There are no invoices for J.F. Shea. In 2012, J.F. Shea was given another contract to increase the sewer capacity in Beaumont and create recycled water. They were supposed to increase the sewer capacity from 4 MGDs to 8 MGDs. It never happened. Right now, the city is trying to increase it from 4 to 6 MGDs. And of course, the whole recycled water fantasy that's not happening. Albert Webb. After the FBI raids, everybody ran, and Albert Webb stepped in. Albert Webb and Associates took over Beaumont's 2 scams, the bonds and the sewer. There's no bid contracts. I pulled everything for you. There is not one bid contract. They have done the feasibility study, which did not include a financial feasibility because the city has no money. They have done 2 sewer rate increases without voter approval for this money, one in 2006, one in 2013. At the last council meeting, they had another sewer rate increase. The money is all gone. There is no sewer rate increase. They did the feasibility study without any financial feasibility, and then they gave them the contract to do the preliminary design. And then the city awarded them the contract to do the final design before the water board approved the preliminary design and before the preliminary design was released. So nobody could bid on the final design. And it was awarded to J.F. Shea, yeah. They were supposed to use the preliminary design.
This is the 2012.
No, this is 2012 was J.F. Shea.
Right.
This is Webb.
Okay.
This is 2016. In November 11th, 2016, Albert Webb was gifted the preliminary design after they already did the feasibility study. So that's a conflict, right? They weren't supposed to do both. And then in April, the preliminary design was due in May of 2017. In April of 2017, the city awarded them the contract to do the final design. And I gave you the transcript, they talk about, why didn't anybody else bid on the final design? Well, it was a joke. There was no preliminary design to bid on. How would they know what they're bidding on? And everybody knows Beaumont's a scam. Nobody bid because there's nothing to bid on. So they give Webb the final design contract, $2 million something, and then a month later, Webb releases the preliminary design that has never gone to the Santa Ana board. It never went. because the Santa Ana Board approved the city's design back in 2015. Get it? Get the catastrophe? I will email it to you.
Yeah, that's helpful when you do
But
that.
there it is. Every invoice, no invoices for JF Shea, 22 million gone. And I gotta say, here I find this permit that the State Water Board gave JF Shea for 2012 headworks upgrade. This permit is dated like March of 2017 or something for this year. How could you people possibly be giving JF Shea a permit for headworks when those things were never completed? There was no expansion to 8 million MGDs. It never happened because now they're trying to get the expansion to 6 MGDs. It's all a scam. It's the same scam over and over and over. The theory that they could put recycled water in that little sewer plant is ridiculous. There's no room. It's a little place, and it's from 1920 time. It just does not have the ability. Maybe it could, but probably not. And let's not forget, this city is going to do it themselves and make a brine line to Orange County. They're going to go through a dozen cities. No city would have to be crazy to let Beaumont plow through their city when Beaumont has clay sewer pipes that are busting all over town because they won't repair their own sewer pipes that were put in the 20s. So the thing is a catastrophe. Hope Smite says in 2016, they ask her, one of the developers asked her plainly, when are you going to put a cease and desist on this sewer plant? This is ridiculous because they have spent all of this money. And Hope Smite says, wow, maybe we should, because this city just keeps dragging this stuff out and changing things, and nothing ever happens. Millions and millions of dollars for planning, and they never build nothing. Thank you.
No, thank you.
There you go, Laufer. Add to your collection. Happy holidays, man. Do some reading over the weekend.
Hans-Peter Walter, good to see you.
Morning. I know you have a packed agenda. I won't take much time, but I came here because I'm Hans-Peter Walter. Good morning. I work at the law firm Chronic Moskovitz, Tiedemann and Gerard here in town. And I was recently retained by Miss Mary Wood to help resolve what I'd characterize as a nasty homeowner water rights dispute up in the foothills on Highway 50. Mary Wood owns a restaurant there, and there's about a dozen cabin owners that all kind of share a water supply source in the foothills on Forest Service land. The direct purpose I'm here for today, I'm looking into a lot of the issues, and we hope to resolve them, is that Mary Wood is listed as the owner of a water right, license 3553, application 008163, and she recently received notice from the board. Unbeknownst and unauthorized by her, the board received a request indicating that a man named Mr. Frank Romano was the primary water rights holder and wanted a change in the ownership of that water right. That cannot happen. That cannot happen. She received that letter November 7th. It appears that the ERIMS database may have already made this change. The notice she received said she had 30 days to protest. She sent a letter to Eloise Berryman at your staff, and she hasn't received anything back. That's not unusual, but I'm here just to make sure we do everything possible to freeze that because, again, this is kind of going around our backs. I've tried to reach out and have not gotten anything back. Mr. Romano is one of the people on the other side of this dispute.
Is it he's claiming that he owns the water right that she owns? I'm just trying to follow what.
Currently, this license 3553, a small, again, domestic water right for a restaurant up on Highway 50 between here and Tahoe, is in Miss Mary Wood's name. I'm holding right here, dated November 15, the bill for this year's water rights fees.
Yeah.
She's paid those for the last 7 years. There's, again, a complicated history on this water right, previous restaurant owners, subdivision of the land to these cabins, et cetera. As you guys are aware, water rights disputes are all six-figure problems, but not everybody has 6 figures to delve into the issue. So I'm just trying to make sure that this doesn't happen behind our backs. And we'd like your assistance to freeze that. And also, I think we put a request in, but we're unclear exactly how this change request was communicated, what it said, who did it, how it was started. That's potentially important information. I don't know what it says. The notice you sent says that the Division of Water Rights received notification on Halloween that Frank P. Romano is the owner of property served by this water right license. He may own one of the dozen cabins, and again, it was all originally one piece. So I don't know what's going on, but that's my request. Again, if Eloise Berryman is the right person, she's received a letter. I can leave the notice. I have copies of the notice and the water rights fees bill and my card, and we'd like to work with you after the holidays to try to resolve this in some fashion.
Oh, sure. Here's my suggestion. You can give it to Mr. Laufer, but my guess is that the Erics are still out in the hallway. So you should grab them in the hallway, too.
Okay.
And say, I told you to go talk to them, so it's... Or Diane, what do you suggest? So Diane, see, we got the full house here.
Okay, and I appreciate it.
But
Again,
yeah, Diane, you can come up here and say,
my
hydrology's fine.
purpose is not to criticize anybody, only to try to get Ms. Wood some help because situation seems to be kind of spiraling downward.
No, you can figure out what's what and see a copy of what was filed, and it'll help staff actually sort it out, too. So.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
No, of course. Thank you. Very much. Okay. We are now on to consideration of adoption of the November 7th and 8th meeting.
Okay, move adoption.
Second.
Seventh. Just making sure. Okay, got it. So I'll, is there a second? You seconded it. So I'll abstain from the, can we do them separately? Because I have to abstain from one and not the other. Can I just say I'm abstaining from the 7th and voting yes on the 8th?
And I'll abstain on the 8th and voting yes on the 7th.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got that. Okay, good. Okay, we're set there. Okay, all in favor with that? Okay, done. All right. We now have 3 uncontested items, and again, are they still uncontested? 4, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 4. Thank you.
But
Vice
one of them
Chair?
has a change sheet.
Right, saw that.
I'll move for adoption of these items with the associated change sheets.
I'll second, and thanks to staff
Yeah,
for
go
these
ahead.
items.
Yeah, we're not, it's not that we aren't interested, it's just in the interest of people's time who are waiting to speak, sitting here. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Those carry, thank you for the good work. All right, item number 6. Current hydrology. It just spit at us yesterday, right? That's all we got. Although it snowed up north, right? There was more up north. Good.
While folks are coming up, I thought I'd use this opportunity to make a suggestion, and maybe folks can think about it while the presentation's going on. But when we were in Southern California, we received a presentation from Metropolitan Water District that, they took the opportunity while we were there to give us an update from their perspective on hydrology and also diversity of water supply and other issues, conservation. I found it to be very useful, and was thinking that maybe periodically, not necessarily at every board meeting, but where appropriate and folks are available, because usually we're in Sacramento, not in areas throughout the state, but to the extent that folks are available and would like to do a presentation, for example, Santa Barbara, maybe Russian River,
a great
you know,
idea.
certain areas of the state where we've taken a keen interest, and use it as an opportunity while there's nothing in particular before us to just get a better understanding of issues in the watershed.
That is a great idea, just so you have a guest presenter talking about what their water supply is and how the hydrology affects them. I think that is a really good idea.
I would support that as long as they are succinct, as our staff is.
Thank you. Good morning, board members, everyone. My name is Chris Kwan.
Oh.
Yes,
Just pull it a little closer. You
Thanks.
don't have to lean, just pull it closer.
sorry. Thank you.
Sure.
Good morning, board members, everyone. My name is Chris Kwan, environmental scientist. To my right is Vadim Demchuk, water resources engineer. We are from the Division of Water Rights, Bay Delta Sacramento unit, and presenting item number 6, hydrology update on the Bay Delta watershed. So as of last Friday, for the Northern Sierras, the precipitation accumulation is at 9.4 inches, jumping from 0.8 2 weeks ago due to the recent storms. As of this date, it is 142% of historical average. For the San Joaquin, the index is at 3.2 inches, jumping from 0.4 2 weeks ago, and as of this date, it is 0.67 of historical average. Next, for the Tulare Basin, the index is at 0.5, jumping a little bit from 0.1 2 weeks ago, and it is at 19% of historical average. So for our reservoirs, all the reservoirs shown, except for Lake Paris and Oroville, are at least at historical average levels. For Oroville, the repairs on the main gated spillway were met deadlines on November 1st, enabling the spillway to release up to 100,000 CFS. The Department of Water Resources have lowered the lake level to 700 feet to provide that extra flood protection space.
And I should know this from being glued to the Oroville stories for a while, now that they've finished that spillway, will they keep it as artificially low the next time it starts raining big time? Or are they still going to be conservative because they haven't finished the emergency spillway?
For the latter, I think they're going to, well, I know they said they will keep it at 700.
They're going to keep it
in preparation of the rainy season. So they're going to be releasing to maintain at 700 feet level so that in preparation have that flood capacity space until the emergency spillway is completed. The emergency spillway is activated at 900 feet elevation, so they want to keep it at 700. 700 is 80 feet below average for this date.
Okay.
For Cachuma reservoirs, it is at 37% of capacity, 52% of average, which is about 1% lower each since 2 weeks ago. Diamond Valley is at 88% of capacity. 2 weeks ago, it was at 86% capacity. Here are the drought conditions. Currently, the Southern California coast is either moderately or abnormally dry. Everywhere else is okay. In comparison, this was last year, this time, a big improvement thanks to a really wet 2017 water year, which Vadim will now review.
Thanks, Chris. The Department of Water Resources recently released a recap of water year 2017. So I'm going to try to make this exciting, give you some highlights here.
It's a good picture.
Yeah, definitely. So we know that water year 2016 left us dry. We have 60% of the state was in severe or extreme drought, and we were really anxious to see what water year 2017 will bring. And it definitely made a difference. So how can we explain this difference? This is the coefficient of variation of precipitation. I'm sure you've seen this before.
We should have a T-shirt made of this, I think.
Definitely.
Hey, holiday 2017. Yeah, I'm thinking.
So for most of the nation, the variation of precipitation is a smaller fraction of the average, shown in the yellow and pink dots. Well, California is a little different. We have a higher degree of variation from year to year as opposed to the average. So in other words, for the East Coast, let's say 1 year looks like the next year, which looks like the next year, and so on. Well, in our case, 1 year could absolutely look like nothing like the next year. And that's what we have in this case. Atmospheric rivers made a big difference for water year 2017. I know there's a lot of things going on here, but essentially what this is saying is that the West Coast experienced 49 of these atmospheric river events making landfall. Researchers recently categorized these storm events into 4 categories. One thing to note for this slide, 1/3 of these were at least strong or extreme for water year 2017. This is percent average of precipitation for water year 2017. As you see, most of the state is at least average, shown in the yellow and green. Also, key Sierra Nevada watersheds are well above average in the magenta color. This obviously helped with reservoir levels, as Chris has shown, as well as significantly boost snowpack. This is California snow water content, and 2017 is shown in that brown color. Going top to bottom is northern, central, and southern Sierras. Despite near record wet conditions for statewide total precipitation, 2017 is still below the record beater there in the green, 1983, for April 1st statewide snow water equivalent. Something to take away as well, if you notice that red line, that was us not too long ago, believe it or not. It's the record breaker for minimum April 1st state snowpack at only 5% of average. Here's a look at average temperature departure from average for 2017. Last summer was the warmest on record for much of California, with many site-specific temperature records broken, if not shattered. And in particular, you might remember San Francisco's record beater of 106 degrees. And here is my last slide that I would want to close with. This shows that in the last few years, California has experienced record warm average temperatures. The takeaway for this figure is that, that increase that we see, that trend that we've all seen before. So this shows that California has, it's facing some consequences. In this case, in particular, the effect on snow water content and snowpack. So, we had water year 2017, it had record-breaking things in terms of precipitation, but if we have warmer temperatures, that snowpack is limited. So that's a big takeaway. So in conclusion, water year 2017 was extreme. It had many interesting things going on. Is the wettest winter, followed by the dry summer, followed by crazy winds for these fires that happened. Hopefully we don't have all these crazy things happening at once again. Some takeaways. Number one, the hydraulic variation in California really shows that we're at the mercy of just a handful of atmospheric storm events. So depending on the storm track, if a handful of these go north or south of us, it really could tip the balance in terms of a wet year or a dry year. Number two, these wet conditions really helped dry soil moisture. As Chris mentioned, the runoff in major river basins exceeded 150% above average, in some cases 200% above average. And I think there's going to be a lot of people talking about, if this wet year was absorbed by the dry soil conditions. Right. I think each region will have its own story, and we know some counties are still going through, drought impacts. I don't have a magic number for you guys, but I know that it'll probably take a consecutive amount of wet years or above average years to truly make a difference. And number three, we had an unusually high amount of precipitation for a La Nina winter. As we know, the wettest winters typically happen during El Nino winter conditions. So the inability to correctly or accurately predict seasonal precipitation using the status of the El Nino oscillator as an indicator of seasonal conditions shows how much work we still have in this area. So that was water year 2017. I think we have a lot of good things to remember as we gather around the table this holiday. We had a good wet year. So with that, this concludes our presentation. If you have any questions, we're here to help, hopefully.
Very good presentation, Mr. Demchuk and Mr. Kwan. Could you go back to the snow water content slide just to, yes, just to revisit your point. So do you believe, the analysis has been done by scientists to support that conclusion that you alluded to, which was, if you look at the north, the top slide, we had more precipitation in 2016, 2017, maybe more as rain versus snow, but is the falling limb of the brown curve compared to the green curve an indication of the impacts of higher temperatures that you showed in a later graph?
From my understanding, that's exactly what I see happening, that diverging from the green line.
The snowpack is melting earlier. The negative slope is earlier in the year, in mid-April, as opposed to the green line in later April.
And less to start with.
That's really interesting because in terms of, I've read some of the DWR's climate change and water supply analyses from a couple of years back. And the point in that was the different peak, the timing of the peak of runoff versus the timing of the peak of demand splitting apart more, so that high runoff is earlier in the season compared to high demand, which is in midsummer for farming in cities. So this is interesting because this reinforces the concern about having snow storage and the associated runoff that moves that peak of runoff more closely to the peak of demand in our state. So this is part of the spread of those peaks and the added challenge and the need for more storage that's decentralized and diversified in our state. All right. I think this is a key point. Thank you.
Thank you. That was great.
So I have
Oh, please, go ahead.
a question about, first of all, this was a really good presentation. Thank you. I've got the hard copy of the slides here and looking at slide 21 as extra slides that you had included. And I appreciate your comments about groundwater, and it's going to be so region-specific. But when would you expect to receive an update on this slide or information that might help us to get a better sense of some of those regional differences, areas that are starting to bounce back versus trouble spots?
I think we'll get a better picture when we get the fall 2017 groundwater data, and that's not available until the end of the calendar year.
Thank you.
It is interesting. Some places got remarkable recharge and other places, of course, not. So
Mostly the southern coast and the Tulare Basin, their wells, many of their wells are still, they've lost groundwater. So that's still something they have to cope with.
thank you very much. Item number 7. I know we have some outside folks in for this. Hmm? Oh, right.
All right, good morning, Chair Marcus, members of the board. Jennifer Toney I'm the senior for the Small Community Wastewater Unit. Today I'm presenting item number 7, which is consideration of Proposition 1 Small Community Grant Funding for the Lewiston Community Services District. This item would approve a total of $15,560,300 to the district for consolidation of 3 wastewater systems. The project is located in the town of Lewiston in Trinity County. It's approximately 33 miles west of Reading. The 3 wastewater systems proposed to be consolidated were constructed over 50 years ago with the Lewiston Dam and Trinity Dam as part of the federal Central Valley Project. The town is adjacent to the Trinity River, and it is considered a small, severely disadvantaged community with a median household income of $31,250. The population is approximately 500, and the consolidated system will serve 259 connections. Over 90% of the connections are residential. So here's a map that shows the location of the 3 systems. From left to right is Lewiston Park Mutual Water Company, and then Lewiston Community Services District, and then the Trinity Dam Mobile Home Park. And right above the Trinity Dam Mobile Home Park, you can see the Trinity River that's flowing. And I apologize, it looks like the labels didn't show up real well on this slide. All 3 of the wastewater systems have had violations and are reaching the end of their useful lives. Lewiston Community Services District has experienced extreme infiltration and inflow problems due to aging pipelines. Lewiston Park Mutual Water Company has portions of their collection system that use Orangeburg pipe that's causing infiltration and inflow also. The high I&I causes operational problems at the wastewater treatment facility. And the aging facilities place Lewiston Mutual Water Company at risk for further violating their permits. The Trinity Dam Mobile Home Park has a collection system which takes raw sewage to a pond on site. They have had discharges to adjacent property and into ditches which flow into a nearby stream that's a tributary to the Trinity River. So this resulted in press releases urging downstream homeowners that use the Trinity River as a drinking water source to boil their drinking water. So the project addresses numerous health and safety and environmental concerns. Major components of the project include managerial consolidation. Lewiston Community Service District will operate and maintain the system upon consolidation. There will be upgrades to the Lewiston Park Mutual Water Company wastewater treatment plant, which will be the treatment plant that will serve all 3 systems. And there's a list of the major upgrades listed here and also in the board item. Other major project components include repair to a 6-inch aerial pipeline that crosses the Trinity River. This takes the treated effluent from Lewiston Park Mutual Water Company over to the disposal site. They're also going to replace all the Orangeburg pipe service laterals and install a new collection system to the Trinity Dam Mobile Home Park.
Quick question.
Sure.
What process does the activated sludge replace? Does that ring a bell? What's their existing treatment process? Or is it
I think it's just a pond, a
It's
treated.
just an aerated pond type approach. Okay. Or oxidation ditch type,
Yes.
more passive. This is a little more active, more energy requirement.
Right.
Okay. Thanks.
So the total project cost for the entire project is $16,367,300. Of this amount, we're proposing providing the $15,560,300 in Proposition 1 Small Community Grant Funding. which leaves $807,000 that still remains that the Lewiston Community Services District. They are seeking funding from multiple other funding sources, including IRWM, USDA, CDBG, and approving the project now allows Lewiston Community Services District to start on their design while they're seeking the remainder of the project cost. So we will add a special condition into their financing agreement, which states that disbursement of construction funds will not be done until they have the total project costs secured. So we have a commitment from one of the other or two other funding agencies. So the cost per connection for this project is $69,648. So the reason why we're bringing this project to the board today is because the 2017-2018 Clean Water State Revolving Fund Intended Use Plan allows the Deputy Director to approve consolidation projects up to a maximum of $8 million per project. However, the IUP also states that projects that join communities may receive funds on a per community basis rather than a per project base. So due to the multiple communities involved in this project, we're proposing a grant of approximately $15.5 million. The IUP also allows the Deputy Director to approve projects up to a maximum of $60,000 per connection. This project is slightly above with a cost per connection of $69,648.
And that's the reason why you're
Yeah, that's the main reason, and the amount of grant funding that we're providing to the project. So we have received numerous support letters on this project. We received a support letter from the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board, who is here today with us if you have questions for them. We also received support letter from the Division of Drinking Water, because once the wastewater systems are consolidated, the next step will be to consolidate the drinking water systems with Lewiston CSD and Lewiston Park Mutual. Other support letters came from Congressman Huffman and local residents. And we realize that the amount of grant funding that we're providing to this project is substantial. So in order to support the long-term sustainability of the system and the district, we're going to provide additional technical assistance once the systems are consolidated. So staff recommend approving the proposed resolution, and I'm happy to answer any questions at this time.
Great, thank you. Very thoughtful, and also thoughtful on the part of the community to do the consolidation. I have speaker cards if necessary. I also have Mr. Reed from the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board, but my first question is whether folks have any questions or concerns, because if they don't, again, apropos of our uncontested items, I'm looking at Jim for direction. Happy to hear. Oh, yeah, go ahead. That'd be nice.
Come on up.
If it wasn't already answered.
And also, just having done work in sewer rehabilitation, Orangeburg, even in the Bay Area, it crops up and that sort of thing. I always wondered what folks thought about the useful life of Orangeburg pipe. Clay we can get a good 50, 75 years out of, even more. But Orangeburg, I wonder how long that stuff really lasts to the point where it becomes just a hole in the ground.
Hello, my name's Tom Warnock. I'm a principal engineer with Pace Engineering up in Reading. I also wear a few other hats. Pace serves as the chief plant operator of record for the Lewiston Park Mutual Water Company for the Lewiston Community Services District. So in this small community that we work with, we end up wearing a lot of hats for that community, which is a good thing. It's happened before. So to answer the question with regards to the type of treatment process we have up there going on right now, the Lewiston Park Mutual Water Company does have an activated sludge plant that was put in during the 70s. And so it's a package plant, steel box, and it's going, almost gone. The two other community, the Trinity Dam Mobile Home Park, it takes septic tank effluent and goes into a pond, and that pond it's not a good thing. I could belabor
That
you
is
with-
a term of art.
Yes, it's not a good thing. In the wintertime, sometimes we see 6 inches of freeboard. That's not a good thing. Then the LCSD, the Community Services District, they take septic tank effluent 2 to a pond, but it perks so fast that in the summertime, you don't really have a nice lens of nice green water to protect, to accept the sewage, and so it's really not a good process. So to answer your question with regards to Orangeburg pipe, I think for sure it's like we're talking, the plant is 62 years, or the facilities built back in the 57s. So it's 60 years old, and then some. And back in about 20 years ago, it was failing then. So I'm gonna say maybe 30 years for Orangeburg pipe, if you're lucky. So, but don't hit it, because if you hit it, it's a mess.
Okay, I'll bite. What is Orangeburg? I should know, but I don't.
Like it's black pipe, but it's asphalt impregnated cardboard. Asphalt impregnated cardboard. It's a cardboard pipe. And it's, back in the day when they built this thing, they meant for it to last a certain amount of time, a short amount of time. These are all Bureau of Reclamation facilities, and so they meant it to last for a certain window. And the dams were constructed, and
When was it
It's
popular
supposed to be
in
short-term.
use?
I got it.
when?
Yeah, what time frame?
Back in the
50s?
50s, yeah. And it's around, I've seen it around other places, but it's definitely an artifact. When you find it now, you go, oh geez. And it doesn't take a whole lot to damage it. And it's worse than clay pipe for sure.
And real difficult to work around, like you say. If you're doing another utility and you happen to run into it, it's
Gotta be totally
very
careful.
delicate, yeah. It's damages super easy.
Thank
Not
you.
durable.
Hey, we want to thank the staff too. The staff has really been great to work with, and so they're doing a good job. Okay.
Thanks, good to hear from you.
Yeah. All right. If we have a motion, Mr. Reed, are you okay with me going? Okay, good. Is there a motion?
I'm going to move staff recommendation for adoption and thank everyone for working on this. In my humble opinion, this is the example of a system that we should be involved with and partnering with, and I think you demonstrate that. And not only the technical need, the useful life, reaching its end, but also the institutional proposal that goes along with the technical and engineering proposal for this community. We really want to thank everyone for stepping up and making the commitment to be more holistic in water management in the Lewiston area, and it's a good model for other places in our state. And so with that, I heartily endorse and move adoption of staff recommendation.
And I heartily second.
Yes. Nicely moved and seconded. Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Carries. Thank you all for the good work. Happy flushing ahead. All right, we'll now take our mid-morning break for 15 minutes and come back at 10:35 before we go to the next item. right, we're back. It is now 10:38. And we are returning to discuss, to hold a workshop on draft regulations to prohibit certain wasteful water practices. Say that 3 times really fast, certain wasteful water practices. And to make monthly water use reporting mandatory. So I'll turn it over to staff for a presentation, and then we'll hear from the public. Thank you all for joining us as we continue this conversation that the governor had asked us to do, and to see what we take from our experience during the drought and apply more permanently, as we know that we're in, the world has changed. We're in a different world. We know that climate is going to continue to make things more challenging, and that we need to respect water and not take it for granted anymore. And so I suspect that this will be, it's an interesting societal conversation of what it is we need to be doing towards the future as a minimum. So again, this is not the whole, everything we do going forward, but which particular practices really in this day and age in 2017 should be a set of permanent rules on how we use water. So with that, I'll turn it over to staff for the presentation.
Good morning, Chair Marcus and board members. Max Gomberg with the Office of Research, Planning, and Performance. Someday we're going to change that name.
Say that 3
Yeah, say that 3 times fast. With me is Charlotte Ely, who was the lead staff for developing these proposed regulations, and she's going to give the presentation. And we're supported by David Rose from the Office of Chief Counsel. And I just want to echo what you said, Chair Marcus, about this. These proposed regulations are both very modest, but also significant in the era of climate change. They're modest in the sense that they've been essentially on the books since we began the emergency regulations process all the way back in 2014 during the drought. They're about clearly wasteful water uses, which is why the board is taking the step of proposing to use its waste and unreasonable use authority to implement these. At the same time, this is significant because it's about shifting societal norms in response to shifting environmental conditions. And as a society, that's something that we need to do in the same way that we've done it in other areas with our waste stream, for example. We used to throw everything, that's right, we used to throw everything in one bin. It went to the landfill. Now we sort, we recycle, and that's been an important societal shift in terms of how we use resources. The same applies here, that this is about a societal shift towards ensuring that we're always using water efficiently. And again, the actual prohibited uses here, it's fairly modest, but the importance of the societal shift as we enter an era and with more extremes, just as we've seen over the past 6 years now with extreme drought and high extreme precipitation, fires, floods, the whole list of the impacts that we know are only going to be more intense as years go by. This is an important part of our change as a society to build resilience. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Charlotte.
Good morning, Chair Marcus and members of the board. Today we are here to talk about one regulation to prohibit permanently certain wasteful water use practices. These are the same or substantively similar to prohibitions in place since summer 2014 when the board first adopted emergency conservation regulations. This is one small part of a larger framework to make conservation a California way of life. After discussing each of the provisions, I'll explain how the proposed regulation differs from current prohibitions in the emergency conservation regulations. You all have in front of you the proposed text of the regulation now. For those in the audience, if you have not yet, please pick up one of the handouts from the back of the room to follow along. One final note before we get started, we're in the early stages of the public comment period for this regulation, and at today's workshop, the written and oral comments we receive will be added to the record.
And then we'll make a formal proposal. This is an extra step we like to do to start the conversation, and then we'll make our proposal when?
February 6th or February 21st, depending on the timing.
So this is early in the rulemaking process. We're in the early stages of the comment period. So this is the formal staff proposal that's going out for comment, but it's not before you for voting. And very likely there will be some modest or larger changes before it's presented to you for voting.
Right. So it's an iterative process that we're starting now.
Absolutely.
Being clear for the people, I'm always thinking the people listening on the web who haven't been with us for the past 17,000 years. Or maybe it just seems that way.
So this image here has become almost iconic. We see Governor Jerry Brown speaking to a crowd of reporters at the site of a manual snow survey on April 1st, 2015. We're standing on dry grass, Brown said. We should be standing on 5 feet of snow. A large body of recent research suggests that the co-occurring warm and dry conditions that gave rise to the recent drought are not exceptional. To quote the 4th National Climate Assessment, which was released just 2 weeks ago, the unusually low snowpack of 2015 may become our new norm. To adopt to our new abnormal, we need to use water more wisely and efficiently.
This should be the holiday T-shirt picture.
Yes.
I don't know. I've got 2 candidates now already on the slides today. Yeah, I don't know. One on each side.
How will we do that? Again, this proposed regulation is part of a larger framework to make California, to make conservation a California way of life, which in and of itself is part of even a broader vision to manage our water resources sustainably. The California Water Action Plan is a 5-year roadmap used by the Brown administration to bring resilience and reliability to our water systems and to restore important ecosystems. 10 principles define that roadmap, including making conservation a California way of life. Through a pair of executive orders, the governor instructed state agencies to help Californians make permanent changes to make conservation a way of life. Executive Order B3716 laid out a framework for moving the state from temporary emergency measures to a more durable approach. At this time, we are not moving forward with one of the elements of the executive order. The executive order directed the state board to prohibit wasteful water use practices and to make monthly reporting of urban water use data by urban water suppliers permanent. There is pending legislation that includes specific provisions regarding water use and conservation reporting, and the state board intends to wait for the legislative process to conclude before moving forward on adopting any reporting regulation. So in the interim, we encourage suppliers to continue reporting. Okay, now on to the prohibitions. For the following 7 slides, I'll review each of the major provisions of the proposed regulation. And again, if you have not already and you would like to follow along, please pick up one of the printouts from the back of the room. So under Title 23, Division 3 of the California Code of Regulations, the proposed regulation would add a new chapter, Chapter 3.5, and in that chapter would add Article 2, Wasteful and Unreasonable Water Uses. The proposed regulation would create within this article, Section 963, Wasteful and Unreasonable Water Use Practices. In Section 963, new provisions would prohibit several water use activities except where necessary to address a health or safety need or to comply with a term or condition in a state or federal permit. Section 963, Subdivision A contains definitions, and Subdivision B1 prohibits particular practices. So the first prohibits the application of water to outdoor landscapes in a manner that causes runoff such that the water flows onto adjacent property, non-irrigated areas, private and public walkways, roadways, parking lots, or structures. The second, the use of a hose that dispenses water to wash a motor vehicle, except where the hose is fitted with a shutoff nozzle or device attached to it that causes it to cease dispensing water immediately. For those who have been watching these prohibitions closely, note that we refer to water here, not potable water. We're skipping to the fourth now. Subdivision B1D prohibits the use of potable water in an ornamental fountain or other decorative water feature except where the water is part of a recirculating system. The third prohibition prohibits the application of potable water directly to driveways and sidewalks. The fifth, the application of water to irrigate turf and ornamental landscapes during and within 48 hours after measurable rainfall of at least 1/10 of an inch of rain. The seventh, the irrigation of turf on public street medians or publicly owned or maintained landscaped areas between the street and the sidewalk, except where the turf serves a community or neighborhood function.
So this picture is the community or neighborhood function example.
So there are three pictures here. And we recognize that in some instances, irrigating turf may provide functional and recreational benefits. And so, for example, in the bottom right, we see Sacramento's Capitol Mall during Pride. Concerts, public gatherings, farmers markets that occur on the Capitol Mall wouldn't be possible if that turf were replaced with native shrubbery, for example.
Right, and similarly, the one on the left, depending, might or might not be where people run. I know a lot of places where it's where people run on grass rather than on the pounding concrete. So you're suggesting leave it to the community to make that determination.
Yeah, so we're not proposing a permitting or approval process for determining whether or not the irrigation of that turf provides a community or neighborhood function. This would be determined by the community. So the following two slides show what we refer to as the hospitality provisions. Subdivision B1G prohibits the serving of drinking water other than upon request in eating or drinking establishments. The next slide here, this is subdivision C. It's actually not a prohibition, but a requirement. And it requires that operators of hotels and motels shall provide guests with the option of choosing not to have towels and linens laundered daily. The hotels or motels shall prominently display notice of this option in each guest room using clear and easy to understand language.
And can you go back to that for a minute?
Sure.
I know you're just laying it out, but I'm just trying to eliminate some of the choices. I mean, my observation is that there are hotels that have been doing this for 20 years, and it's hard to find a hotel, motel, et cetera, that doesn't do this. The water in restaurants is a little bit different because you have a culture of wanting to welcome people to the restaurant, and we want them to hydrate, for example. There's a difference. So that'll be part of the discussion, I imagine. So.
Absolutely. Anecdotally, I will say I recently stayed in a hotel that did not display anything like this.
How outside the norm?
So subdivisions D and E allow for penalties to be issued to particular entities. Subdivision D allows for penalties to be issued to homeowners associations or community service organizations that violate sections 4735 of the Civil Code. That section of the Civil Code basically prevents HOAs from preventing homeowners from replacing turf with low water using plants and or from letting landscapes brown during a declared drought emergency. Section 963, subdivision F establishes a penalty for the taking of any, Section 963, subdivision E allows for penalties to be issued to any city, county, or city and county that violates section 8627.7 of the government code, which prevents cities and counties from fining individuals for not watering a lawn or having a brown lawn during a declared drought emergency.
And you may have said this when we went through it. So the first one should say shall not violate Civil Code Section 4736 versus shall not prohibit, shall
thank
not
you.
violate.
Yep, thank you.
Huh.
So finally, Section 963, subdivision F establishes a penalty for the taking of any action prohibited in subdivision B, D, or E, or the failure to take any action required in subdivision C as an infraction punishable by a fine of up to $500 a day for each day in which the violation occurs.
Now, on this, I have a question I was asked earlier, and I wasn't sure of the answer. So this is an added enforcement fine provision that localities can use. I know later in your presentation, there are all kinds of localities who already do a bunch of these things, and they can do their own rules, right, on that. I always get there were things during the drought, we need to give them ability to go up to 10,000 on certain things. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about giving the sort of basic ticketing authority. Or give me the right words.
Yes. At the moment, there is a difference between this rulemaking that the board is engaging in and the drought emergency rulemakings. They're under different authorities. This one's permanent, the other one's lasted up for up to 270 days. The legislation that Charlotte mentioned already that directs the board to adopt the reporting and a number of other things would currently, as drafted, essentially close the loophole and allow local agencies to enforce these prohibitions, these rules as well. But at the moment, at the time that the board is considering these or will be considering these, unless that legislation passes, the board will be the only entity with authority to enforce these rules. So there is a difference between the drought emergency rules, which local agencies and cities and counties could enforce, and these, even though these are, for the most part, the same prohibitions, at this time, they're not enforceable by anybody but the board.
That's a limitation. All right. But we're hoping the legislation will catch up. And a lot of these regulations are things that agencies want, so.
And an agency, even if they were allowed to, if the legislation passes and they are allowed to, it doesn't mean that they would have to enforce these rules. And as you noted, many agencies already have similar, if not the same rules. They can enforce their own rules. They just can't enforce the ones that the board has adopted. If they amend their ordinances to adopt these same rules for consistency, they can enforce those at that point.
You know, as the societal norm changes, yeah.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay.
How would that fit in, though, on the median prohibition in light of the fact that there's, I think I heard you say that there would be some flexibility where the median serves a community or neighborhood function, and that determination would be a local determination, but we'd be enforcing. So how would that play out?
I imagine that if our enforcement staff or our complaints hotline got a tip of irrigation of turf, that they would then reach out to the entity responsible, because that prohibition would apply to public agencies, so public agencies irrigating or maintaining that turf. And if the agency said, we have a community need for this, and explained what that was, I would imagine that the Office of Enforcement wouldn't have a very good case and wouldn't want to go forward with that, because it wouldn't be a violation. There's no permitting or approval process. The board doesn't have to say yay or nay to somebody's community or neighborhood function that they're identifying.
So we would have to figure out what to do if we were hypothetically in a situation where something seemed ludicrous, then we'd have to decide what to do about it. I don't anticipate that.
Have to decide if the community or neighborhood function encompasses everything,
Yeah,
or
I mean,
just
we'll have to
you know
cross that
anything
bridge
that
if we
passes a
come to
laugh test, or there can be further clarification throughout this process if we think that that's necessary. But as it's currently being proposed and put out for comment, we think it's broadly encompassing any functions that the community thinks are important to it.
So we're talking about some pretty important element of meaningful enforcement really happening at the local level, not at the statewide level, but there being a statewide level authority. Do we need more specificity as far as, you know, it says that fines, punishable by a fine, the dispensation of that fine money, you know, do we need to be, or is that something we rely on another part of the water code to go into the cleanup and abatement account, or do we know where that ends up and how that, the dispensation thereof?
In other parts of the water code, there have been cleanup, which I believe would apply here, where enforcement actions taken for certain conservation-related prohibitions or rules go into the water rights fund, but then they are available for conservation-related activities. So that was some legislation, or that was in legislation that passed during the drought that carved out, if you will, what can happen with those monies from enforcement of rules such as these.
And we haven't gotten there yet. We're going to get there towards the end of the presentation. But with respect to medians, where they're not being used for some type of functions right now, we definitely want to encourage local jurisdictions, if their intent is to ultimately transform the landscape in those medians away from turf to a different type of lower water use landscape. We want to make allowance for that, and so you'll see that we've put forth some questions about how we would do that within this framework, what type of additional time would be allowed.
Oh, okay, good.
Okay. So again, the proposed regulation includes prohibitions that are the same or similar to those that the board adopted and readopted during the drought emergency. And they expire this Saturday, November 25th. Again, there are several differences between the most recent drought emergency prohibitions, specifically for the provision prohibiting the irrigation of medians. The State Water Board has proposed also prohibiting the irrigation of turf on publicly owned or maintained landscaped areas between the street and sidewalk. Some communities refer to these as verges or parkways. For both medians and parkways, the Water Board has proposed exempting the irrigation of turf that serves a community or neighborhood function. So exempting from this provision the irrigation of turf on medians that serve a community or neighborhood function, it's reflecting that turf in medians is reasonable in some communities due to existing uses, like running. For the provision prohibiting the irrigation during and within 48 hours of measurable rainfall, the State Water Board has proposed defining measurable as 1/10 of an inch. This is consistent with the Clean Water Act. Defining measurable as 1/10 of an inch would provide greater clarity, simplifying compliance with and enforcement of this particular provision. For the provisions affecting runoff, residential car washing, and the irrigation of turf on medians and parkways, the State Water Board has omitted the word potable, proposing that these prohibitions prevent the waste and unreasonable use of all water, including reclaimed water and stormwater. Expanding the scope of this provision to prohibit the waste and unreasonable use of all water, not just potable water, recognizes the value of alternative sources in building resilience to climate change. Hence, using these sources reasonably and beneficially is also in the interest of the people and the public welfare. The provisions in the proposed regulations are not new to Californians. Again, they were first adopted in July 2014, and the entire state is subject to them until Saturday. But Californians have also been subject to these prohibitions through other policy mechanisms as well. So this slide shows the results of a random survey of urban water supplier water shortage contingency plans. These circles show the percentage of the suppliers that have included the referenced prohibition under normal or stage 1 drought conditions in their water shortage contingency plan. So as you can see, the majority of the suppliers already prohibit the majority of the practices addressed by the proposed regulation.
But that's in, you said normal or stage 1?
Normal or stage 1.
So the difference here is moving to normal and what? Okay. But this is actually a higher number than I realized, so that's interesting.
And given projected climate change impacts, what is now stage 1
right.
is becoming our new normal. So, but in other words, what this regulation is not only necessary in that it is, helping to implement the executive orders, that it is adapting California communities to increasing drought risk, and it is securing water for a growing population, but it's practical. It's ensuring statewide consistency and congruity. So to analyze the environmental and economic impacts of the proposed regulations, we needed to calculate the expected water savings. We document those calculations and the regulatory package, which is available online. And the gist is that the estimated savings will be low, a drop in the bucket.
Is that from the current or from, what's the baseline?
I'll explain that now. You might recognize the bucket graphic on this slide. To calculate the water savings, we use the statewide water conservation data collected under the emergency conservation regulations. We conservatively estimated that 1% of the water Californians saved between June 2014 and April 2016, and then averaged over that 2.8-year period, can be attributable to the prohibitions. That's approximately 12.5 thousand acre feet per year. We then assumed that the proposed regulation would result in commensurate annual savings. So 1% makes sense given the influence of pre-existing policies such as urban water management plans, SB X7x7, the 2014 proclamation calling on Californians to voluntarily reduce water by 20%, the 2015 mandate, et cetera. 1% is also supported by a separate analysis that we did to estimate future water savings due to each of the prohibitions. We assume water saved due to the already widely occurring prohibitions would be minimal. And if you look to the bottom left of the slide, you'll see that relatively few of the randomly surveyed urban water suppliers have the rain prohibition in place. So as fewer than half of the surveyed suppliers address the rain prohibition, and as we had the available data to do so, we carefully considered its impact, calculating prospective water savings by comparing winter water use during the drought to the 2013 winter baseline. We basically used the rain prohibition as a proxy for estimating the impact of the prohibitions en masse. Oops, not quite done. Okay, so that the proposed regulation would save 12,489 acre feet per year is the basis of our economic and environmental analyses. And before reviewing those analyses, I wanted to say that while the proposed regulation would result in water savings that are annually a drop in the bucket, over the long term, it would have a lasting impact, changing the way that we value and manage water here in California. So our environmental impact analysis shows that there is no evidence that the proposed regulation would have a potentially significant effect on the environment. To determine whether or not it would have an effect, we prepared an initial study. And as many of the provisions of the proposed regulation do not have the potential to affect California's environment, think of the hospitality provisions, for example, we focused primarily on those that would reduce outdoor waste. The initial study examined in depth how and whether the proposed regulation would affect runoff and how changes in runoff could affect surface waters and the biological resources dependent on those waters. We especially focused on urban areas as well for a number of reasons. First, they're densely populated and they're more likely to generate significant volumes of runoff. They're more likely to have impervious surfaces. And so rather than sinking into the ground, runoff would flow over impervious surfaces and into waterways. And third, they're more likely to import water, increasing the probability that runoff could affect stream flow. On the other hand, in a rural area, conserved water wouldn't be diverted in the first place, so it would stay in the stream. So we went through all of the potential effects on the CEQA checklist, and again, showed that there is no evidence that the proposed regulation would have a significant effect on the environment. We filed our negative declaration initial study with the state clearinghouse on November 7th. Based on the results of the economic impact analysis, the proposed regulation would not have a major impact on the California economy. The economic analysis is described in detail in the Form 399 supplement. I'll highlight some of those methods and assumptions here. For example, we assumed that 85% of urban water suppliers are public and 15% are private, which is why if you were to read through the Form 399 supplement, you'd see that the fiscal or government costs are much higher. We assumed that all suppliers would recoup the first year's revenue losses through a one-time surcharge and thereafter would adjust fixed charges to cover fixed costs. This is why there are only costs in the first year. So we calculated costs by summing the cost associated with purchasing nozzles, which would be needed to comply with the residential car washing prohibition and lost revenue. The first year direct costs are roughly $14 million. We calculated benefits by summing variable cost savings and offset demand savings. Annual direct benefits are roughly $15 million. So again, based on the results of this analysis, the regulation would not be a major one.
So just so I understand, is the assessment that the amount people spend on the nozzle gets recouped in how much water they save?
Once,
trying to follow that.
yeah,
I know you were using the language that you're supposed to use in
yes.
economic, but I didn't understand what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, the idea, well, there are very few, again, going back to this slide, there are very few areas of the state where the nozzle, where people would have to purchase nozzles because this requirement has already been in place through water shortage contingency plans and other and other policy pathways. So first, we only looked at the places that would, hypothetically need to purchase nozzles, and then looked at, we can go in depth some other time if you like. It's quite detailed, and but basically after the second year, because suppliers will have adjusted fixed charges to recover first costs, it's not an ongoing cost. It's something that's recouped. So those charges would be passed on to the customers, and it would have been, entirely completed by that first year. All the new nozzles would be purchased. It's an assumption that we use to build the economic analysis.
Well, some cases the
Some
agency will buy. Are you
instances, it
assuming
would
the
be-
agency's buying the novel?
Yeah, we
nozzles
assumed
for the
was
sake of
like
the
a
economic
50-50
analysis?
split. Sometimes the wholesale costs, sometimes private costs, and then distributed.
And these are all pretty conservative estimates in terms of the costs. I would venture that the total costs are likely to be lower than what we're showing here.
So, yeah, Chair Marcus, I think.
I'm trying to figure out where the benefits come financially, but we can follow up on this.
The nozzle purchases are a one-time cost, and we had divided those up where suppliers might purchase some and give them out or sell them at a reduced costs to the end users, but the revenue losses are the variable costs. So those would have a cost in the first year and then savings in a subsequent year. So that's why for our findings, the year one direct costs is around 14 million. It's not an annual direct cost. Year one would be the highest of any of the years in which there would be costs because of the one-time purchases, and then because the variable costs that the suppliers might see would then turn into savings as things evened out. So the annual direct benefits are expected to be essentially something that would happen every year, whereas the costs would be highest in the first year. And it's really quite in-depth in our document, so we can go through it as necessary.
No, I don't want to take the time here. We'll spend some time on it.
Okay, so here's our schedule. We've already reached a number of milestones. We delivered the draft rulemaking package to the Office of Administrative Law on Halloween. We have provided the Form 399 and the economic impact analysis to the Department of Finance. Again, we delivered the NEGDEC initial study to the State Clearinghouse on the 7th, and today we're holding a public workshop. As for comment periods, we're accepting public comments through December 26th. And our targets, is that the Water Board would adopt this reg no later than February 21st, 2018. And the final rulemaking package to the Office of Administrative Law would be delivered on the 28th of February, allowing for the regulation to be approved and effective by the 1st of April, so before the highest water using months of the year. It's an ambitious schedule. So these are the discussion questions that Max had referenced earlier, and I'll quickly walk through them. First, are there additional wasteful and unreasonable uses the Water Board should consider prohibiting? Are the hospitality provisions at all times of waste or unreasonable use of water? Are they more effective to implement only during a drought when they can serve as both a conservation and a messaging tool? Are there other ways the prohibitions affecting medians and parkways could be phrased to minimize the irrigation of turf on medians, avoid unintended consequences, allow for well-planned landscape transformations, and still allow for the maintenance of turf that provides social, recreational, and/or environmental benefits? Is turf in these areas a good candidate for recycled water, and could the provision be limited to potable water? And on the last slide, I'll have all of these questions up. So here is my contact information. I'll be happy to take any questions at this time about the presentation. And if there are none, we can jump into the public comment period. Yep.
Do you mind sharing? I know there are a number of people who have suggested a lot more new uses, and I'm sure we'll hear today that people think we're being too timid in what we're doing. And similarly, we may hear from some people that we're being too aggressive on different things. But can you just give a couple of examples of the things people have suggested that you chose not to include in the staff draft? Again, you're asking the question because this is a workshop, but I'm just curious as to what, not to go through all of them, but some of the ones that you thought about and then just weren't quite comfortable putting them out for a actual permanent reg.
Yeah, and there are people here today that can speak on some of those recommendations, but one of the recommendations we received was to prohibit the irrigation of landscapes in excess of 1.0 ET.
Oh, moving into the arena of the long-term efficiency regs. Okay, I remember that one, people suggested.
Another was the application of water for dust or other pollutant suppression purposes other than by the means of a hose fitted with a flow cutoff device or a vehicle fitted with sprinklers. And then, another good one was sprinkler irrigation between the hours of 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. except by use of a handheld bucket or similar container. And this is something that you see a lot in the water shortage contingency plans, for example. So there are a few.
So your feeling was just that those were good candidates for water shortage contingency plans or for individual work or for work once the efficiency standards were blessed, as opposed to going to what becomes a permanent ban standalone as the societal norm shifts?
Yes, all of the above. I think we felt that a lot of these suggestions were too prescriptive for a statewide set of regulations, and they would be difficult to implement and enforce.
Would you feel differently if we weren't working on long-term efficiency legislation right now?
Probably on a couple of them.
During the emergency, we went into detail about the application of water to driveways and sidewalks for health and safety purposes. We looked at pressure washing, but I don't see that level of specificity in the draft regulation language. And is there a way for these type of common sense exceptions to be a little more featured in the regulation?
So the regulation text that is being proposed is the same regulation text as was in place in the drought emergency, except we have removed the word potable. So there's recognition in this long-term package that use of recycled water or recirculated systems, and we've done, I don't want to call it a survey, but done some inquiries and looked into this, and it seems as though a large portion, if not all, of the businesses that we could readily find out about that their business is pressure washing streets, sidewalks, things like that, already use recirculating systems or something else. So there are little buggies that drive down the street and, street sweepers, those recirculate already. So that is a change from the emergency regulation that doesn't necessitate use of the health and safety exemption. That is just taking that off of the table outside of the prohibition. But certainly anywhere that the health and safety or other permit exception applied in the drought would continue to apply because we're using the same language. So all of the interpretations that we've given would apply exactly the same way. That was the hope in using the same language.
So to give another example on that, we heard a lot during the drought from operators and cities that have splash parks where people go to cool off. And some of those, for health and safety reasons, don't recirculate the water because the children, people are drinking it potentially. So again, the health and safety provisions are here. These are not intended to in any way restrict the operation of splash parks, power washing operations, and the like.
Other questions before we hear from folks, please?
Yeah. I'd like to hone in on the median issue. So first of all, looking at the what water suppliers are doing currently in your survey, we see that about 18% have this type of prohibition. So I'm looking at this like this is going to be a change. This is going to be a change for communities. And the concern that I have is unintended consequences and tree mortality. And so really wanting to hear from communities directly, to hear how it would impact them. But before going into the discussion, I have a few questions. So first of all, I want to better understand exactly what is meant here, looking at the language, the irrigation or turf on public street medians or publicly owned or maintained landscaped areas between the street and sidewalk. So the picture that you had of, let's see here, yeah, that would be the public street median. And then moving forward where there's the woman walking on a pathway.
Yeah.
This is this is the example of areas between the street and sidewalk. Okay, so what about I'm wanting to make sure I understand public ownership, because there are many communities where the municipality owns that strip. And
Yeah, even though the people may not know it, but they
right,
do.
and they've got, this looks like a lot of areas that I think we are all familiar with. So there might be, instead of a park on the other side, a house. And so the public may own that strip, but it's being maintained by the homeowner. And so I want to make sure I understand that you're intending to cover that type of landscape in this language, including in residential areas.
Yeah, yes, that is the intent. The idea here is to facilitate more efficient irrigation and more California-friendly landscapes, both in the medians and in that strip, to the extent that it's controlled by a public entity.
That's what I thought. So if that's the case, I have big concerns with this, because homeowners are going to be responsible, and because even though the public, the municipality may own that, homeowners are responsible. And looking through the analysis that you have on the environmental analysis, I think that it misses this tree mortality issue, and there is a potential environmental impact. If the trees are saved, it's going to cost. It's going to cost going in and thoughtfully taking out that turf, as opposed to killing it with Roundup, which would impact the trees, or ripping it out and putting in a different sort of either different landscape or letting it go to dirt. And then in that instance, the existing irrigation system would be watering dirt, not turf, or tree roots, but each situation would be different. And so I think that we need to take a look at the potential environmental impact. And in the event that we think, which I don't think this, that people are going to go to every effort to save their trees, because we learned during the drought that, first of all, some people may have been confused and ended up with tree loss. And for those that were trying to somehow manage the trees but not the turf, it didn't work out so easily. And so this is a process that the public will have to go through. So let's take the subset of folks that feel so strongly about trees that they're going to comply with this in a very thoughtful way. Then that is going to be very costly, and that's something that looking at the economic analysis on this issue, I see here that staff is saying that on page 45, that an inexpensive option would be to stop watering a turf-only median altogether. And then you go on to analyze that there are a lot of different ways to comply, and we don't really know what the cost would be, but we're assuming that municipalities will choose the least costly response, and that's what I'm concerned about. So the least costly response is just stop watering. And in communities that are relying on these trees, not just for enjoyment, but for, shade tree, I'm concerned, I think we all would be, about tree mortality and then ending up with heat islands. And so, and I know that that's not the intent, but just want to call out these issues. And in the event that we do go forward, first of all, I think we need to be more thoughtful about unintended consequences. But in the event that we do go forward on this, I think that we need to provide some flexibility and give communities plenty of time to go through this in a thoughtful way and to consider the costs. Obviously, we like all communities to move in the direction where we see native plants in between the trees, or some other approach, but that is very costly.
Right. Agree with all of those? Do you, especially because the trees are so important and the challenge to individuals? I mean, what some communities have done when challenging us to look at, I won't name names, but they just gave it all back to the public. And that doesn't help either, because the public doesn't necessarily, it's better to have an urban forest that's curated and managed. So it's something I spent a lot of time on that's complicated, but I'm anticipating we'll get a lot of comments on that, and you're inviting people to comment and tell us how we might do this and in what circumstances. I also had someone, right now all I have is anecdotal, but folks talking about you have to consider the fact where someone opens a car door and they're trying to get out of their car along that median. You could say then it is a public benefit to have something stable that people can step on, and it may well be lawn. It's not going to necessarily be gravel, speaking as someone who wishes their kids would have a more level thing where I park. It's actually kind of a big deal. So the question is, on this one, do you also have some sort of, does the community, whatever the term was, community or neighborhood function count for the verge or parkway as well? Okay.
Yes, and I think we completely agree with you, Board Member Diadama. I mean, those are unintended consequences that you mentioned that we don't want to see. I just want to draw the distinction between areas where there are trees and then areas where there's only turf.
Yeah.
So where areas where there are trees, that's absolutely, to the extent that people are irrigating to maintain that healthy tree canopy, we absolutely want to encourage that. And if that results in some irrigation of turf that's near or under the tree, I don't think that's not something that we would be looking at for enforcement. Where we have turf-only medians or verges, again, to the extent that it's not where people are stepping out and of vehicles and need that soft landing, particularly in medians, that's where we do want to encourage, with appropriate time and understanding of what the budgetary constraints are, transformations. And that could look like application of mulch for a period of time until there's a full landscape plan in place. There are a lot of different options for that, and we definitely want to consider those and have something that allows for that creativity and to get to the types of landscape outcomes that we're trying to achieve.
And then I had just two other points. One is there's a tree mortality task force. And so I think that'd be helpful to reach out to that task force and get their comments on this. And then another question, and that is sort of the overlap between what's being proposed on those landscape areas between streets and sidewalks, and the prohibition of watering sidewalks. And so I think that in a lot of areas, they're hitting both, like maybe the sprinklers on the lawn, and it reaches across the sidewalk, hits the sidewalk, and then hits that turf.
Well, and the park cars. And
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So again, just something to think about as far as changes. It's wasteful to hit the sidewalk, but it's a way to use some, limited amount of water on that strip. Making a change would require irrigation system changes.
Or going out watering.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right. And I think you're being thoughtful. We do need to make provision too that we don't want to create the unintended consequence of just paving those green strips, because they could actually be, in certain areas, infiltration galleries and really support sustainable.
That's a really good point. That would be the ideal.
And in some places, tree planting would be the way to go. But of course, there's time and expense with that too.
But this means, we need to allow that local sophistication, because while the grass and the trees might be coexisting, the trees don't need 100 inches of irrigation a year like the grass does, and so, but the local experts will really know, what plan can be evolved towards that is more water efficient. It doesn't have to be water efficient ideal, but certainly, look for ways to improve. So we have to create that space for locals and to have the flexibility to avoid the consequences you rightly pointed out.
Those are good. Anything else? All right, we're going to go to comments, and we're going to keep going all the way through, so hopefully folks got a snack. I anticipate it will take us till sometime between 1 and 2, but it just depends. So we'll set it at 3 minutes. Only one person asked for 4, so 3 should work. So with that, I'll give them to you 3 minutes at a time. And please focus your comments on what we need to think about and what we propose in the first place. And really, the more specific, the better in terms of being helpful to us in our thinking today, as well as in the written comments. So I have Joe Berg from the Municipal Water District of Orange County, followed by Fiona Sanchez from Irvine Ranch Water District, followed by Elizabeth Lovestead from Eastern Municipal Water District. Hello.
Good morning, Chair Marcus, member of the board. I'm Joe Berg, Director of Water Use Efficiency for the Municipal Water District of Orange County. And is that better? Great. So we've got some mixed feelings on the proposal. We're in support of certain sections of it because many of the things proposed here are already part of many of our retail water agencies' permanent restrictions. So the positive shutoff nozzles, those are kind of the no-brainer type items, the watering of hardscapes, et cetera. So we're in support of those. I think the hospitality items, we're in support of those as well. As mentioned before, most hotels have the linen and towel option available already. I think that by including water requested only upon service in restaurants makes a lot of sense too, as an ongoing reminder to further instill the ethic and awareness of water conservation. So,
do you think so? Or let me just ask. I'm not trying to. Maybe I'm trying to be the devil's advocate on this one. And on all of these, I don't know what I think. The issue here is what's appropriate for a permanent regulation, not what would be the perfect world if I were queen, or if anybody in the audience were queen or king. And so it's a different kind of a question.
Well,
I have not been many places that still have that, and they put the water down as and you want people to hydrate rather than ordering something else necessarily. So this is one where I really want to hear. I was convinced during the permanent regs to continue it after it started raining, only because water agencies wanted it. And I have a thumb on the scale for things water agencies want, but they've got to really make sense to me, because I worry about a rule that's not enforced at all. So is it something that water agencies would even enforce during a non-drought? Or is it just, if they put out the little sign, that's a good thing to remind people that water is important.
We've taken the approach of improving awareness. We've got the table tents that are available. We provide them to the restaurants.
But that's part of
at
your
no
outreach
cost.
to
It's
the
part of our
business community. You
outreach.
encourage them to do that.
Yes.
All right.
Sorry,
that's just one of the
frankly, I
issues.
think if a restaurant looks at it differently, they'll see that it'll save them water, it'll save their staff time, save money in terms of having to process cleaning of glasses and et cetera. So you're not withholding water from patrons, you're just requesting that they request it. So I don't see that that's a terrible item. And in fact, I think the benefits of further instilling the awareness and ethic outweighs that.
Well, that's interesting because I also have mixed feelings on it. You know, if you're a customer in a restaurant and you have to take extra time to get the water, you're waiting around, you can't even get the order, let alone the water. This could go either way. And I'm in the camp a little bit more that this is one of those tools that makes sense to use during a drought because we need a certain set of tools to to press down the gas pedal a little bit on conservation. And I'm convinced this is one of those that we can exercise with the drought flood cycle. That's just my personal opinion. So, because I think, we want a credibility with the public as well.
Yeah. And then the other area that we support are those for the cities and the HOAs to give them kind of sideboards to operate.
Those are the most popular, I think.
In times of drought emergency. So that's where we're coming at in terms of support. And in the areas where we have concern, one is the irrigation within 48 hours of rainfall, and in particular, the 1/10 of an inch measure. I think that during the drought, agencies did feel a little uncomfortable and, how do you measure 1/10 of an inch of rain throughout your service area? And as we went through that, I think that we got more comfortable with being able to determine measurable rainfall ourselves. So I would just ask that perhaps we have the no irrigation 48 hours, but let the local agency determine what's measurable and appropriate for their service area. And along with that is, sometimes, you may need more than 1/10 of an inch of rainfall within 2 days to meet your irrigation requirement. So in the summertime, we've been getting some monsoonal flows in Southern California that come and give us a rainfall, but it's not enough to meet our need for that period of time. With regard to the medians and parkways, this is probably our biggest concern. And I believe that, and so I have a few observations along with this. So right now, many cities in Orange County are in the process of re-landscaping their medians because they were required to turn off the water to the grass during the drought. And so what's happening now is they're beginning that process and they're realizing that they're subject to the landscape ordinance. And a street median would be considered a commercial landscape, and therefore the maximum applied water allowance would be the 48% of the local ET. And that doesn't allow for grass. So by standard of the landscape ordinance, that's already going to be happening. And the same is true for any new medians as well.
But the landscape ordinance is a guide. It doesn't have enforcement teeth, does it?
It is required.
I don't know that it's, then it shouldn't be a problem.
That would apply to new only?
New and rehabilitated.
Okay.
So they're putting in lower water requirement turf, for example, or lower water requirement
no,
other things?
Even with the...
So they're already transitioning is what you're saying?
Yeah, even with the state-of-the-art irrigation technologies, you still can't support turf. Even a lower KC turf grass, you can't support it at 0.45 maximum applied water allowance.
And I don't mean to take too much time with this, but 0.45 applies to medians are all CNI?
All commercial landscapes.
That's ornamental landscape?
Correct.
As opposed to a football field or
That's
a soccer
correct,
field?
yes.
Okay. I didn't realize that. Thank you.
Also, something else that we've been implementing throughout Southern California is a recycled retrofit program. So we've gotten literally hundreds of acres of landscape areas that have been converted from potable water to recycled water. And many of those are cities, and some of them are even street medians. So we've recently incentivized them to convert from potable to reclaimed. They also recognized that during the drought, they were not allowed to irrigate turf grass on medians with potable water. So they said, okay, let's go follow this fit for purpose path and convert to recycle water, and we'll be able to still continue to irrigate the turf and the medians. So here we've made huge investments very recently to be able to comply with what was going on, and now we would have to go back to those sites and get them to re-landscape yet again.
Right, you might want to think about comments about, the rule as a whole, of course, but also about grandfathering or things like that, because, that has been a big investment that we've encouraged people to make, and the question is whether they should keep making it or not. I mean, it's a total valid choice.
Sure, and so my final closing comment on that one is to just exempt recycled water from the requirement.
And then you should probably wrap up.
Yes,
This is helpful. You're the lead off, so it's helpful.
Lastly, I looked at the economic analysis, and I did not see that it took into account the significant costs that cities are going to have to incur to do the re-landscaping. I think it missed that entirely, and I think that that's going to be a very significant cost. The cities are required to comply with prevailing wage, and when you're doing construction on a street median, the hourly rates are significantly higher. So I would just ask that you consider allowing the landscape ordinance to address these issues instead of requiring it through the proposed reg.
Thank you. Ms. Sanchez, followed by Ms. Lovestead, followed by Katie Porter from California Urban Water Agencies. Hi, there you are.
Hi, good morning, Chair Marcus. Good to see you again and fellow board members. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comments just for your consideration as you're considering adopting these permanent prohibitions on water waste. Irvine Ranch Water District really understands the importance of minimizing water waste, and we've had permanent prohibitions that address almost all of the proposed regulation in place for over 15 years, regardless of drought. And I think that's the case with many agencies. We've got a long history of implementing water efficiency programs, and we're really committed to helping the state achieve its long-term goals. A few comments, first related to recycled water. Development of alternative drought-proof supplies is a really important component of the state's long-term reliability goals. And the state board should really encourage and recognize investments into those supplies, particularly and including recycled water. Recycled water is not subject to reductions during drought or shortage, or even as a result of climate change in the same way that potable water will be affected. Sewage is still being produced all the time, and we treat it, and we're able to use that for beneficial, cost-effective uses, including irrigation of our landscapes and trees. As you know, during the recent severe statewide drought, recycled water use was not restricted. And in our landscapes and trees irrigated with recycled water remained healthy and prevented the development of heat islands in our community, where over 90% of the community is irrigated in the public areas with recycled water. The cost potentially to our community to have to retrofit and replace all of these streetways, parkways, and medians that are currently irrigated with recycled water would create significant economic impact to the public agencies, the cities, and the school districts in our service area. And we certainly would request that that economic analysis be included, since it does not seem to have been considered. Simply letting landscapes go die is not going to benefit the trees and also create negative impacts to our environment as well as our economy and real estate values. We also potentially, by restricting use of recycled water for this beneficial use, would also result potentially in increased levels of ocean discharges, which we are trying to avoid. So we ask that recycled water be excluded from the proposed regulation. We do certainly agree that landscapes should be irrigated efficiently. but recognizing that long-term outdoor water use is going to be a part of the long-term efficiency legislation, I think maybe the vehicle where the outdoor use can be addressed in addition to what we already have in the model landscape ordinance. Oops. Could I just make a couple of more quick comments? I'm sorry.
Just quickly. Sure.
So in terms of the proposed ban on serving drinking water, it isn't something that we would typically include in our permanent regulations. The amount of water savings from that is really minimal, and it really serves us more as a tool for public messaging. During shortages, implementing that action is a tool where we can really alert the public that, hey, something has changed, and we really need you to take action or increased action. And so we would like to preserve that tool for our use. Since the water savings is very minimal, and it's more of a public outreach and strategy tool that we would like to preserve. So we would request that that not be included in a permanent regulation so that we can use it during times of drought or shortage. And quickly regarding the
you mean just the drinking water in restaurants, not
Right.
the hotel one?
Right, just the drinking water served in restaurants, right. And then finally, if I could quickly comment on the irrigation, the shutdown. Most of us don't have that necessarily as a prohibition because most newer irrigation controllers that we spent a lot of money investing in have automatic rain shutoffs. And I would simply request that the regulation at least be aligned with those devices that are on the market, most of which have the threshold set at the lowest would be 1/8 of an inch rather than 1/10 of an inch. So if that is going to be a regulation, that to recognize the cost effectiveness, we've already got devices out there. Let's align with what's out there on the market. So just in summary, we just would ask that you kind of consider the recycled water, that it's a beneficial use, the cost to implement some of these programs, that they need to be cost effective, and help us preserve our public messaging tools. Thank you.
Thanks. Ms. Lovestead, followed by Ms. Porter, followed by Dana Freehoff from the San Diego County Water Authority. Hello.
Good morning, Chair Marcus and members of the board. Thank you for holding this public hearing and considering our comments. We just want to say that we support the proposed regulations for the most part. We have some small revisions, but again, these are, as you've heard, these are similar to requirements that we've had in place for a long time.
Might be the poster child for all of these, I'm not sure.
And what we found is they're actually a really good education tool. A lot of times when we inform our customers that they are violating our administrative code and, water's running off or it's just watering at the wrong time of day, it's a lot of times a real education tool for our customers to let them know they need to change their behavior.
Well, can I ask you a question on that? Someone asked me the question earlier. I mean, part of the value of these isn't that we have a phalanx of state water eco cops going out there and ticketing people. It's to have your back.
Right.
In a way to say, here's where the societal norm has evolved as a state. Because people kind of want to know if they're being picked on or if it's the community norm or is it a broader state norm?
Well, and our program is, it's often customers reporting on each other, other concerned citizens. And, a lot of times it'll be a neighbor saying, hey, my neighbor's sprinklers have been running for an hour. They're not home. I can't get a hold of them. And we're able to go ahead and call that customer and say, we got this reply. And they're able to address it where, somebody else may not. If we didn't have that program in place, they may come home and have their, lawns flooded and a high water bill. So most of them like being told that there's something wrong and that they can have the chance to address it.
And anecdotally, because people tend to go to the fine as if you're going to do it, it's about setting a community norm, and that my understanding from during the drought is going out and talking to your customers, being able to have the conversation takes care of 95% of the issues.
Absolutely, yeah. Most of the time they'll get a warning letter or a phone call, and that takes care of the problem, and they'll address the situation. So, in regards to the hospitality restrictions for the water, our thought is that it could be an indication that conservation is a way of life, and so maybe that long-term message is a good one to say, we're changing the way that we do things, and we're saving water every drop that we can. For the irrigating turf and medians and parkways, we encourage some revisions to the proposed regulations. First, we encourage you to exempt the recycled water irrigation. Similar to other agencies, we put in a program in place, and we have a robust recycled water program, but during the drought, we put a program in place that worked with a lot of public agencies to convert their irrigation system to drought. We offered them a funding program and some financial incentives to kind of help them, offset those costs. And the conversion costs are quite significant. A lot of times that's what prevents them from going onto recycled water. And, we encourage them at the same time to, if they can, also convert their turf where it's not needed to something else. And again, when we can offer them financial assistance, they're able to do that. A lot of times it's the cost involved that prohibit that. And so exempting those that have converted to recycled water, we think would be appropriate. Just recognizing that they're already taking steps to be efficient. We also support having no new turf in medians and parkways if they're not necessary. Again, that would be supporting the current model water efficient landscape ordinance. We also request that public agencies can apply for a not locally cost-effective exemption. Again, working with our customers through the drought, a lot of them, especially the cities, they want to do the right thing, but again, it can be costly, especially if you have irrigation systems that are not only irrigating turf, but they're irrigating trees or plants or other things, and going out there and retrofitting those entire irrigation systems can be costly. And some of our cities just don't have the funding to do that. And so in order to preserve kind of the, again, the trees and the other irrigation, we ask that they have an exemption if it's cost prohibitive. And of course, any funding that can be made available to these customers for turf replacement is also helpful as well. One of the things that we found is that, providing funding for turf replacement and doing it right can also be a message to the public. If you have somebody that low balls it and does a really inexpensive job, it can kind of detract from making changes. While if you have a good product, it can be an example to the community. We also echo the concerns about controllers that may not register rainfall as low as 1/10 of an inch, and again request that local communities continue to find measurable rainfall. Thank you for your consideration.
Thanks a lot. We'll look forward to talking with you more, of course, given all the work you've done.
Yeah, these are good comments. I was just going to turn to staff a little bit. This is as we look at the language on these issues of medians and landscapes, is it possible, I think we have a choice. We can rely on the model landscape ordinance to some extent and not speak to it, or isn't there also an option for us to take language from the landscape ordinance and make sure that our language is consistent with it so that we're sending a consistent message?
Or that it tracks with it as it evolves over time.
Right. Very good.
We could do any of those things.
Yeah, I think.
We could do all sorts of things.
We could do all sorts of things.
Hey, take it easy now.
But to clarify the earlier discussion about the model landscape ordinance, it is a model ordinance. Local jurisdictions are supposed to use it when they make landscaping decisions, but it does not have an enforcement component.
Okay, very good.
Interesting. Ms. Porter. Followed by Ms. Freehoff, followed by Adam Robin from the Regional Water Authority here in Sacramento.
Good morning. Katie Porter, representing the California Urban Water Agencies, otherwise known as CUA. And first, we'd like to say that CUA shares the board's commitment for making conservation a California way of life. We wanted to respond directly to the questions that you posed. First, we do not have any additional considerations at this time for additional wasteful and unreasonable uses. On the hospitality provisions, CUA supports the hospitality provisions. Even though they result in small water savings, we do believe that it is an important public communication tool for many of the things you've already heard about changing public behavior. Regarding the prohibition on medians and parkways, we have a number of suggestions that we would like to offer. First is to clearly define turf. Without a clear definition, sometimes there are lots of different grasses that are used, and it may be confused with what is considered turf and what isn't considered turf. We have some concern also regarding the reference to the landscaped area between the street and sidewalk that Board Member D'Adama also referenced. Part of this has to do with even when it's owned by a municipality, that it can be maintained by a business or a homeowner, and so that can cause a lot of confusion. It could be difficult to implement and enforce, as some of the other considerations that you referenced that did not necessarily make it into this particular proposed regulation. So we ask that you consider the implementation of this particular provision. We'd also suggest that you coordinate with land use planning agencies, such as the California State Association of Counties and the League of California Cities, other cities and counties to solicit input. We'd also support implementing this prohibition in phases to allow agencies time to plan, budget. As you heard from some other commenters, the need to make sure that we're doing this in a thoughtful way so we can maintain the beautiful public spaces in a thoughtful way, but also having to deal with the cost of doing some of these conversions. And to that point also, if there is funding available to help with the conversions, that would also be appreciated. We'd like to provide a couple of other additional items for input. The health and safety exemptions are important, but we'd like to see that specified within the list of prohibitions. Right now in the text, it kind of falls below it. And what we would like to see is a lot of times the media outlet gloms onto that list of the provisions and only communicates that. And so the health and safety exemptions may not get communicated properly. So we think that's really important. And then finally, the language, as you've heard about the 1/10, 1 inch of rain, to have the measurable be more general so that the local communities can implement that more practically. Thank you for your time.
Thanks. Ms. Freehoff, followed by Mr. Robin, followed by Jonathan Young from the California Municipal Utilities Association.
All right. Good morning, Chair Marcus, members of the board. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Dana Freehoff, Water Resources Manager, San Diego County Water Authority. First of all, as a member of CUA, we support the comments that Katie did provide. And again, we support the prohibitions with some suggested revisions. I had a meeting with our retail member agencies. Obviously, we're a wholesale agency, so I wanted to meet with our retail agencies. So we did get we got all my comments are basically based on what we heard from them. The first one is they do support the 2 hospitality prohibitions. The second is the prohibition on not irrigating when it's raining. We do request that the 1/10 of 1 inch be removed. It's probably really impractical to enforce. Rainfall can vary within a community. You can have microclimates, your SIMA station. It rains where your SIMA station is, but not yet where the property is. So we would request that be excluded. And that measurable rainfall, again, if you just use that term, it provides flexibility to the local agencies. I think the focus of our discussion was on the median strips, and this is what we've been talking about. We think, as has been discussed, the State Board has to consider the costs and the time needed to do the retrofits. One example of the constraint, this was the city of Poway, and what they have done within their city, and I think of a lot of other cities, is they have formed these landscape maintenance districts where you're assessed a fee on the property taxes and to provide for the maintenance of those medians and basically the right-of-ways. So when you need to do some capital improvements, you are going to need to increase that fee, which means it falls under Prop 218. So you have to go through a Prop 218 process in order to increase that fee. And also it's even more difficult than your normal water rate increase in regards to increasing the fee, because it's involved in the number of ballots you get, and the majority of the ballots you receive has to support that. So again, it's just a constraint to raising the money to able to retrofit those sites. And so what we would request is that those costs be considered, maybe perhaps to ensure that it's a cost-effective retrofit, and that when you're looking at those median strips, as we've talked about, maybe it is only those median strips with turf that are going to be prohibited, and not if there are trees, to try to help with the tree mortality. And then lastly, in regards to the irrigation of the meetings with recycled water, I think Fiona Sanchez from Irvine Ranch did a really good job in articulating that, and that, again, our member agencies that have recycled water systems believe that recycled water is an efficient use of water and should be allowed to be used on the median strips. There's limited markets for this supply, and if it isn't fully used, then it will just be, unfortunately, in San Diego County, would be flow out to the ocean. So again, we would request that that not be prohibited on the median strips. And then lastly, in response to an earlier comment during the meeting, Diadamo mentioned having water agencies come speak regarding their supply situation. The San Diego County Water Authority would be more than happy to have a representative do that in a very succinct manner, as Tam mentioned. Thank you.
That's good. Before you go, it made me, this issue of phasing in, if we were to agree to an approach at a statewide level on this median parkway issue, is there a home for that type of a plan within an urban water management plan framework? Or do you see another home, an existing planning effort for public medians, strips, and parkways that we could use to implement something in a cost-effective, reasonable manner?
Right, yeah, I am not sure that the urban water management plan is the right place, because that's sort of your long-term planning document, looking at supplies and demands. This is more of a near-term. Okay. So nothing comes up right away, but yeah, we can think about that, and in our comment letter, perhaps provide that.
Yeah, because I'm thinking of the demand part of it all, in terms of just an orderly, thought-out capital, approach over time, over 25 years. That would be a demand management for outdoor use in public areas.
Yes, and I think that's something that'll be needed if we're going to want to implement this. And I just real quick want to thank you for the clarification on the enforcement aspect from the staff, because we had a lot of questions with our member agencies in regards to that. So thank you.
Very important. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Robin, followed by Mr. Young, followed by Kyle Jones from the Sierra Club, California.
Well, good afternoon, Chair Marcus, board members. I'm Adam Robin with the Regional Water Authority. RWA is a joint powers authority here in the Sacramento region. Our 21 member agencies supply water to approximately 2 million people. I appreciate this opportunity to comment on the proposed prohibitions of certain wasteful and unreasonable water use practices. I'd note that our region has maintained a strong long-term commitment to improving water use efficiency. Our agencies were on target to meet and exceed existing requirements in state law to conserve 20% by the year 2020. And during the drought emergency, many of our local water suppliers and other local jurisdictions implemented ordinances and other measures to make sure that these types of practices were prohibited during the drought emergency and in many cases over the long term. We will be submitting detailed written comments before the comment deadline in late December. And as a general matter, I would just note that we support the cessation of practices by all Californians that include things like washing your car without using a shut-off nozzle, or having a ornamental fountain that doesn't have a recirculating pump, or irrigating outdoor spaces in a manner that causes runoff. As the board considers whether and how to make the other prohibitions permanent, however, we think that there are important policy issues that need to be taken into consideration. I think that the discussion today over enforcement was informative. That's something that we're thinking a lot about. I would just note that as a general matter, we would oppose any effort or requirements, not through these regulations, but in an ongoing sense, to shift sole responsibility for implementation of or enforcement of these prohibitions onto local water suppliers. These are prohibitions on practices and actions that all Californians need to be taking into account as they go through their lives. Additionally, for many of the specific prohibitions, we'll be submitting detailed written comments. Folks have already talked about the rain controllers and their sensitivity threshold being 1/8 of an inch. The proposed prohibition threshold is 1/10 of an inch. While we recognize the utility of having some specificity in the regulation, we want to be sure that the letter of the regulation is consistent with what we understand the spirit and intent of the regulation to be, which is ensuring that we're not irrigating spaces when they don't need it because they're getting sufficient rainfall. So we will be aspiring to put together constructive suggestions for how these prohibitions could be refined so that the spirit and intent is reflected in the actual text. and that we're accounting for the actions that responsible Californians are and will be taking to ensure that they're using water efficiently. So we'll be submitting detailed written comments. Appreciate your time this afternoon, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you.
Yeah,
No.
and I think that's an important point. I think from an engineering standpoint, the power and strength of standardization. And so your point about measurable rainfall, and if there is a standard in, what's available to the consumer over the counter in terms of measurable rainfall within automated devices, that's a compelling issue if there is. I don't know the answer to that question, but I encourage everyone to look at the issues of standardization because that really creates an ease and a common sense in terms of implementing these requirements.
Absolutely. And additionally, we heard from some other speakers this morning about how local climate conditions might be a relevant consideration, how you define that as well. So look forward to putting together detailed comments. Thank you.
Mr. Young, followed by Mr. Jones, followed by Tracy Quinn from the Natural Resources Defense Council.
Good afternoon, board members and staff. My name is Jonathan Young, and I'm with the California Municipal Utilities Association, and CMUA represents some water agencies across California that provide about 70% of Californians with their water. And so thank you for the time to allow me to speak on this issue. A lot of the concerns we have already been addressed, so I'll try and keep these brief. I believe I was the person that said 4 minutes on my card, so we can probably strike that down a bit. Most of our concerns, we do have the concerns with the 1/10 of 1 inch. These have been shared earlier. We do have concerns also in paragraph G. In particular, we think one of the changes that would be appropriate where you talk about between publicly owned or maintained is to change that to an and that way that would eliminate some of the instances where residents are actually the maintaining parties to those spaces. For example, one of our member agencies in a city of 500,000 people, they said that would require them to then go out and monitor over 42 million square feet, or about 726 football fields. And so that's for a city of 500,000 people. So they're very concerned with that issue. Additionally, we recommend adding the word environmental to the exempted functions. And the reason behind that is because sometimes turf is used for stormwater management or for bioswales and things like that. So that was kind of, as the board member had indicated earlier, it does serve an environmental function. And so we just want to reiterate what's been said earlier, that we don't think there should be a prohibition on recycled water, and that medians and these types of spaces that utilize recycled water should be given strong consideration to be allowed to be maintained. So we'll be submitting some written comment as well with these suggestions, and I thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Thoughtful. Mr. Jones, followed by Ms. Quinn, followed by Heather Cooley from the Pacific Institute.
Good afternoon. It's good to be back here after the legislative session.
Have you recuperated? Has everybody recuperated? You're not all smiling.
3
No,
weeks in
they
Spain
haven't.
did it. So with regard to these regulations, we are concerned that given the board's broad authority in this area, that we should be doing more independent of what's happening at the legislature with regards to setting standards that could define at what point agencies are beginning to waste water, and in both the urban and agricultural context as well. We think this is a practice that California needs to go on in the future to address its long-term challenges, and knowing what successes we've had with conservation, we can do more and should be doing more. We don't feel that the legislation, while it can be, ultimately a guiding post, it's not complete, and it's also not necessary for the board to use its authorities to get these successes done. So that, yes, there should be more things the board should be considering, and that is, basically what are some standards based on appropriate climate and, populations, outdoor irrigation, that agencies should be using for, to be considered efficient and not wasteful. I did, I know that there's some other specific provisions that are great that have been thrown out there. Pacific Institute and Heather Cooley, I know I've read those. Those are great, and I support those. But again, there should be more to be done. To the other questions, I would just say that with the hospitality provisions, one thing that I don't think has been mentioned is that, is there a message to be sent if we suddenly say those are gone now? I don't really have an answer because I hadn't thought too much about it, but I do think that that we have to worry about backsliding
Well,
as we usually
hydrate
see.
rather than drink a Coke. No disrespect to Coke. I mean, I'm just saying, I haven't decided, but there's stuff there that's different than your sheets.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing that's been a little concerning through the discussions is the discussion of recycled water, and that we do think that even if it is being recycled, that it should be used in an efficient manner. We understand that there are some investment decisions that were made, and that the board should consider those, but not completely exempt recycled water as a source from any conservation or efficiency measures in the future. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Sorry. So I'm going to have to get this down because then I go back to follow up with everyone. Hello, Ms. Quinn, followed by Ms. Cooley, followed by David Boland from the Association of California Water Agencies. Hi.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I wanted to start by thanking the board staff for their hard work on this effort. This provides a really great opportunity for us to think outside the box, to look at what cities within California and cities and states outside of California are doing, prohibiting practices that are considered wasteful, and also an opportunity to provide some enforcement for things like MWILO or other things that were good initiatives to try to reduce waste, but don't have a really successful enforcement mechanism. In addition to the list that the staff has provided and put together here, we have found some other water waste prohibitions in place throughout the country that would also make sense under these regulations. In October 2017, the Pacific Institute submitted a letter outlining some of these provisions. We support those, and we plan to include those and other recommendations in a written submittal in December. With my remaining time, I just wanted to highlight a few of our recommendations. One, NRDC recommends that the proposed regulations specify that the prohibitions against the application of water to outdoor landscapes that would result in runoff also applies to parkway strips. Second, the continued use of inefficient plumbing fixtures such as toilets, faucets, and shower heads that were required to be replaced under SB 407 is clearly wasteful, and we estimate that there are about 4 to 6 million inefficient toilets here in California, about the same number of inefficient shower heads in single-family homes. We recommend that the board require retail water suppliers to develop and implement a local enforcement strategy to achieve the replacement of these inefficient plumbing fixtures as they are authorized to do under SB 407. I also just wanted to respond to a few of the comments by previous speakers. Recycled water installed to irrigate turf could also be used to irrigate lower water use plants. So I would say that that's not necessarily a wasted investment. And I'd also like to push back on the comment that we need to use more and more recycled water so that we don't put it out to the ocean. I think as indoor water use is reduced over time, we've seen that trend, and our demands are otherwise increased with population growth, that we're going to need to use every drop wisely, whether it's potable or recycled water. So
yeah, we are going to get there.
Support that they be included. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Look forward to the comments. Ms. Cooley, followed by Mr. Boland, followed by Sarah Amizada from the California Coastkeeper Alliance.
Thank you, Heather Cooley, Pacific Institute. I also would first like to thank staff for all of their work in pulling these together and for considering some of the ideas that we put forward.
Thanks for your long letter.
I also agree with Tracy's comments. One, I do think this is a great opportunity, and there are some other measures that could be included in this, including some that are focused more on commercial, industrial, and institutional uses of water. Things like prohibiting single-pass cooling systems in anyone requesting a new water service, or with respect to laundry systems, and new laundry systems in particular, and requiring recirculating. These are prohibitions that already exist in other parts of the state, including in San Diego, Pasadena, and undoubtedly in other areas.
It is really helpful to have things that are already existing somewhere when you're talking waste unreasonable use, because it is about a societal norm changing, it's not a cutting edge thing, it's bringing everybody up to edge.
Yeah, and I do think, that was great to show. That was the first time I had seen the figure that had showed the areas that had already adopted some of these as an indication that these things are accepted. I think it would also be interesting to look at what else isn't included on that list that are adopted in other areas.
Yeah, agreed.
And it sounds like maybe that those data are available. That would be another place to start to look at things that could be added. I also just want to talk specifically on the recycled water piece. I don't think there should be exemptions for recycled water. I agree it can be used efficiently. It can be used for low water use plants. We may be at a time now where it's seemingly we have an abundant supply of recycled water, but that's not going to be the case in the future. You're already seeing areas that are sort of bumping up against greater demand than there is supply. We need to be thinking, as we're talking now about the cost of retrofitting and that's expensive, these are going to be things in place going forward. And so that's going to put us in a better place in the future in 10, 15, or 20 years when we're going to be having these same conversations, and recycled water will be the issue. So I do think there are opportunities not only on the maintaining it on the medians, but then including it within the recirculating fountains and also washing of sidewalks. That shouldn't be done except in the cases for health and safety, as it's stated in there with potable. So that's the end. We will be submitting more comments in December and providing some additional ideas to put forward.
Great, thanks. Look forward to doing that with you. All right. Mr. Boland.
Thank you, Chair Marcus.
Followed by Commissioner Almanzada, followed by Jennifer West from Water Reuse.
Thank you, Chair Marcus and fellow board members. David Boland, Association of California Water Agencies. And I appreciate the fact that staff has been able to put together a package that has drawn a little bit of angst and yet not too much by the water community as a whole. A lot of variation of opinion, as you can tell. Little nuancing of ideas out there. A lot of justification, I think, for different ways of thinking about it. So I've appreciated the fact that the board already kind of teed this up a little bit with the discussion ahead of time. About some of those considerations. And again, we're looking forward to a longer comment period so we can put a comment letter together that articulates a way forward. And we do like the idea of kind of fishing out for some ideas there. The premise that there are suggestions that could come in that could help refine the prohibitions. But in general, we support them. The fact that this is sort of business as usual, the fact that the research shows that most of our public water agencies in California have been doing this for a long time. There's a long track record with most of these things, and institutionalizing them at a statewide level is not that big a stretch. And so we think we want to do that. We like the idea of consistency, and yet again, as we represent these local water agencies and the fact that there are lots of stories out there of details, we need some flexibility. And particularly, I think this shows up on the medians issue. The idea of grandfathering, I think, is an important one about the infrastructure investments. This idea of phasing in is important as well, because there is this investment, there's a signaling that's going on, but it's not an immediate signaling. And that kind of gets to that drought signaling question about hospitality, for instance. And I guess I would propose kind of a splitting of the two possible hospitality measures. The drinking water one does seem rather theatrical, and frankly, I've been to a lot of restaurants in which they just haven't caught up yet, even in the middle of the drought, and it seemed a little, I guess you call it awkward to try to call them out on drought shaming, in the context of restaurants, that might take a while. And in fact, maybe the best purpose of that is more on the signaling, with this idea that it's one of those in our kit bag to respond to drought on a periodic basis. And there are these kinds of practices that do help start conversations, frankly. They may not save a lot of water, but they might be useful in a drought setting context. And this idea of keeping our credibility is important. So I guess our sense that I'm navigating with the water community as a whole is maybe on the hospitality measure, on the linens and laundering and so forth, that's kind of business as usual, as been pointed out. Let's just lock that in and go forward from there. We're not hearing a groundswell of opposition to that. Makes some sense, probably saves a lot of water long term, saves a lot of time anyway for folks. in that industry.
Can you imagine going and washing your sheets every night at home?
Yeah, it's a scandal. And throwing your towel on the floor, I just have a hard time with that anyway. I'm going to hang that towel up no matter what, My mom taught me to hang up my towel.
Don't put it on the floor.
And so they'll never launder that towel while I'm there. Anyway, so the point here is maybe we can kind of split the difference on that one. And on the rainfall threshold, good arguments be made for being precise, but on the other hand, false precision is a problem too with this credibility question, technology, the controllers, all of those questions. And so maybe better to err on the side that the staff already kind of established, which is this idea of measurable means in the context of the local setting. And the fact that many of these agencies are going to be enforcing their own prohibitions, frankly, not the state prohibitions, even though they look the same, smell the same, and probably quite likely the same. And the agents or the citizens aren't really going to know the difference, frankly. And so you guys had talked about this question of lack of enforcement. Well, in fact, there really is enforcement. Gutter flooding is not a family value, no matter what. And we will be enforcing that, and at a local level.
That could be the quote of the day.
Yeah. So just the idea that maybe we don't have to overthink this thing, in terms of a false precision on some of these proposals. And so that we'll be coming up with other ideas. Again, just to kind of reiterate, there is a difference of opinion about the recycled water question. We don't waste recycled water. Again, it's not a family value to waste in general, but the idea that we got this investment for a certain purpose, and we need to have kind of a baseline conditions that's recognized, and that there is this investment. So again, maybe grandfathering, looking at a longer term in terms of landscaping requirements that are going to be in the long-term kind of setting, and work on that longer term. So thank you.
And in that regard, that relates to my question earlier to Ms. Fryhoff, in terms of that longer-term plan and vision, where's the proper home for that?
Well, I think it's pretty clear, our instincts, and we've been talking like this for a long time, we think it belongs actually in the model landscape ordinance, in the planning and practice of urban water management plans long-term. And we think that whatever we end up with on that, we think we already, of course, have some authorities and some clarity about that in the 20 by 2020 process. But whatever we end up doing, we think that local planning is where the decision about how you do landscaping and irrigation, and frankly, it's not so much about the turf itself, it's about the irrigation investment and the type of irrigation we use to try to keep trees alive and not flood and gutter flood with sprinklers that pop up and spray grass in the middle of a street. We're moving that direction, but we think the right context for that is kind of the landscape planning process, which we do have, a process in California, and it's moving forward. Whether or not we need to enforce it more rigorously is a question that is being discussed in another setting right now. And if there's additional need for additional enforcement, that can be discussed as well. Probably not through the idea of prohibitions at the statewide level with no real enforcement teeth. So
well, it's just an interesting question to say compliance with a rule is not complying with a rule like the toilet retrofit or whatever is per se unreasonable. It's just an interesting set of questions to actually think about.
Absolutely. And the signaling question, or, the symbolism of all this is more interesting in some ways than the actual amount of water involved. And so that drop in the bucket, I appreciate the attempt at an analysis that supports a quantitative effect of all of this. Frankly, it's almost Alice in the Looking Glass, I have to say, as you read the narrative about all of the ways and assumptions to try to calculate that drop. And in fact, maybe we shouldn't try as hard.
Right. Well, we have to do the economic and the analysis. It may not be what we roll out.
Yeah.
As an index, it really, but I think, what I'm looking for is really that accountability at the local level for long-term planning on demand management that would also include recycled water, would take into account investments in infrastructure, but also have a vision as we get into decades out when recycled water will be scarce, how, a local city, a local jurisdiction will see that evolving. And that creates an accountability and trust, not only from us, but from the public you serve too.
Well, and many of those themes are locked into and wrapped up very deeply in this legislative process that we're going through now and have been sort of embedded in that process since the beginning. So we think that's the right place for it.
Good. Well, we'll look forward to your articulation of that so that we can have that sense that, it's something we can depend on.
Right. Thanks.
Commissioner Almanzade, followed by Ms. West, followed by Jack Hawks from California Water Association. Congratulations.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Marcus and board members. My name is Sarah Almanzade, and I'm the Executive Director of California Coastkeeper Alliance. I'm here today to strongly support the board's work to permanently prohibit practices that waste drinkable water, such as hosing off sidewalks and driveways and watering lawns when it's raining. These behaviors drive me personally crazy, and I think it's a strong statement to have the board prohibit these practices, not only during times of emergency, but always. These practices were instituted by people, by businesses and communities throughout California over the course of the 5-year drought, and as staff's presentation made clear, have largely become a matter of regular course already. As to the question of whether there are additional waste and unreasonable uses the State Water Board should continue, or should consider prohibiting rather, for me, the answer is a resounding yes. I certainly echo the comments of my colleague at NRDC and Pacific Institute as to urban water uses that should be considered additionally. And I'm happy to see the board assert its authority with respect to urban water use and develop regulations within the scope of the governor's executive order. However, I believe that we can and must, as a state, go beyond the executive order, which was developed during the drought and focused fairly narrowly on urban conservation and efficiency. As our state faces hotter and drier conditions and a future of more frequent and severe droughts, we as a state must reconsider and act to address uses of water that are not reasonable and that are wasteful. Agricultural water use, for example, accounts for approximately 80% of developed water use in California, and I believe must be addressed pursuant to the board's waste and unreasonable use authority. For example, agricultural diversions from flow-impaired streams, flood irrigation of water-intensive crops, and diverting from one watershed to another could logically be considered wasteful or unreasonable uses. Additionally, the failure to reclaim treated wastewater and the failure to use recycled water reasonably could also be considered wasteful and unreasonable uses. So I asked the board to consider the development of other waste and unreasonable uses as we have this conversation as a state. Staff's presentation showed that we have 1% savings on the table, and that we're largely already implementing these regulations throughout the state. There's a much bigger pie out there of water savings and needs and opportunities, and I believe that we need to consider these. And just on the question of the restaurant serving water upon request, I see that really differently. I used to work in the hospitality industry myself, and I'm somebody that loves, 1 or 2 big glasses of water. But I believe that we should have to ask. I think, as a state, 1 million of our citizens don't have access to safe and affordable drinking water. And if we're truly trying to make conservation a way of life rather than just something we do during the drought, I see asking for water and waiting, 3 minutes or so as some really low-hanging fruit. So I would suggest that, I'm sure you may know better, but I think the governor suggested that we make conservation a way of life at all times, and that some really easy, no regrets and no cost practices, such as just requesting water, would fall under that category. So thank you, and I'll be submitting detailed comments as well.
Thank you very much. Ms. West, followed by Mr. Hawks.
Good afternoon. I'm Jennifer West. I'm the Managing Director of Water Reuse California. I'll be very brief since a lot of my member agencies are here and I think have done a very good job expressing their concerns about one aspect of the regulations, and that's the inclusion of recycled water in the prohibition, specifically on the median strips and the other public areas. I really do appreciate the comments and the questions trying to get to more specificity on what areas we're actually talking about there, so that was helpful. And I appreciate the discussion about having the locals determine, making some of the determinations about whether it serves a public purpose or not. Going back again to saying that the locals have in these areas decided where they have decided to utilize recycled water for the median strips. They should be allowed to continue to do so. I'll reiterate what most everybody knows, that recycled water is not allowed to have any runoff. That has been prohibited.
That's right. It's
There's a
already
prohibition in the
rule,
permits
right.
on any runoff. That's been there for all time. So obviously, we've talked about potential benefits with turf that could be used for recharge, swells, and there's local decisions have been made to do this, and especially if they're using recycled water, we'd ask you to exclude that, and really to focus back on what's been brought up here before, the model landscape ordinance. That process is going on right now with Department of Water Resources. Agencies are required to adopt it or something as stringent. There are specific provisions and discussions happening about what is the proper application of recycled water, and so I would focus that on your attention there. We will be submitting comments, and thank you very much for your time.
No, thank you.
Right.
Hi,
Hi.
Mr. Hawks.
Thank you, Chair Marcus and board members. Jack Hawks, Executive Director, California Water Association. In the interest of time, I just want to say that our members support many of the statements made by our public water agency counterparts, especially with respect to the recycled water exemption, the enforcement being moved down to the local level, excuse me, and the measurable rainfall. What I really wanted to bring up, and I really need to sit down with Charlotte on this, like you, I had questions on the economic analysis, especially since it was really limited to the IOUs. I assume you meant the IOUs when you kept saying private water suppliers there. I need to talk to you about the assumptions, the change between year 1 and year 2 on both the cost and the benefit side. It's not a given. Those assumptions are not a given, and I want to sit down with you. I'm not sure if the statement of reasons or the digest will be changed between now and in the in game here, but I assume since you said this is an iterative process, I need to sit down with them, especially since it was just limited to the private suppliers. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Great. No, we need multiple conversations. I mean, it's a group conversation. Well, that was interesting. Thank you. Thoughtful comments all around, all flagging things to think about. And yet there's more, but there were some things I hadn't thought about, so that was helpful. Are there further questions from we asked as we went along, but are there further questions? Okay, please. Comments, you're good? You're good? Yeah, this was a really helpful opener. It allows us to then go back and talk with staff as they shape the rules, and then we look at your comments. I'm going to want to follow up on some of these. Obviously, the median, the tree issue is, as you know, a big deal to me in terms of figuring out how to be reasonable, and the stranded investments, for example. I don't want to force people to rip stuff out that we just got them to do, that sort of thing. So we need to think a little bit more about that, the issue of recycled water. The CII issues I really actually want to dive into a little bit more, and we should at least have a conversation about some of the ag issues. Though I don't have one that comes, it have to be a narrowly defined practice, and the question be, would it be worth it? So there are so many other pressures there, but I hadn't even thought about it, so I want to have a conversation about it. I don't know.
And all great points. Also, just how does this dovetail with the WELO, the Water Efficiency Landscape Ordinance process, and how we can complement it, but look for your critical thinking in terms of how we can strengthen it. And I would like to see the health and safety exemption more prominently featured. As it is, it feels a little buried, and it's an important part of the message, I think, that helps the public accept this type of restriction, if you will. Thanks.
Can I ask a question? I don't want to take a lot of time, but where'd you come up with 1/10? You were trying to be specific because people thought it was vague, right? So you were trying to be helpful, but where'd you come up with 1/10 as opposed to the 1/8?
It's a section of the Clean Water Act defining a measurable precipitation event for managing stormwater.
No, that's the difference, because it's how we measure it in terms of industrial general because you're trying to prevent runoff as opposed to this other context where there's something in use. I thought it would be something like that. So that's definitely we're thinking about. Did you come up with something else?
Oh, on a different matter.
Yeah, no, please go ahead.
I like the idea of suggesting that you reach out to CSAC and the League of Cities on the median issue. So if you could follow up on that, that would be appreciated.
Yeah, we'll probably try to tree people
We'll
too,
do
because
that.
they did a whole caring for trees in terms of drought, so that we know what state of the art is. Because if we could, and this is not the context, we'd tell everybody to plant a boatload more trees.
Climate appropriate
and
trees.
water them properly as opposed to sprinkling them around turf. So yeah, there's some thinking to do because in the long run, we need to save water and plant more trees in our urban areas, but everywhere else too. So we have to think about.
We'll do that additional outreach.
And we also don't want people to pave over medians and verges. That we definitely don't want. So that is important too. Right, right. Well, plus urban dreariness. Sorry, I just think urban dreariness is an important thing to avoid as well. So, well, that was good. Thank you for the good work and for teeing it all up. And if there's no further ado, I will just thank you and say it was a good opening conversation. And I know you'll have a lot of conversations with a lot of people here, as will we all. So thank you all. Nice
Thank you,
job.
guys.
Very nice job. All right. We're done with that. We're not done. Board member report. What does it say about me that I have to look at my calendar to remember where I've been? I know I have one. It's probably just stick with what I do remember, so let's give me a minute. You can tell us about it, or maybe you can't. Okay, I'm fine with what I remember. Sorry. Okay. All right. If you guys don't mind taking it outside so we can continue the meeting, much as we'd love to kibitz with you too. Okay. Who would like to report? Steve.
I didn't really report prior to the previous board meeting,
Yeah,
so
right.
I wanted to just note that on October 30th, I presented at the Industrial Environmental
Oh, good.
Association Annual Conference in San Diego on the climate change and untapped resource of stormwater in the state, and the way our stormwater strategy dovetails with water resource long-term development, and
great.
and connected it to some of the work Mr. Bishop is championing with staff on industrial stormwater as a resource. And then on November 3rd, I attended and presented at the Santa Ana Regional Water Quality Control Board meeting. And that's it.
Oh, and thank you for being a hearing officer for 4 days.
Okay, so Last week, I attended Region 6 board meeting and was saddened and yet happy at the same time about the announcement that Lori Kemper is retiring, and
I didn't
so was
realize
there
that.
for the presentation of a resolution. And she just seems way too young to retire and has way too much energy. So Godspeed to Lori Kemper. And it was announced that Doug Smith will be the new assistant executive officer. And good opportunity for me to hear a presentation from our staff on the development of flow criteria for basin plans. And of course, with all the work on the Bay Delta plan, interesting to be thinking about that work in the context of some of the smaller watersheds. I have some goodies for the rest of the board, but I left them in my car. I have some fish food that is in little containers that Eileen Sobek and I received when we were at the River Gardens tour. This is the Roger Cornwall invitation, and I'll talk a little bit more about it when I bring them next time so that I can make sure to give it to Joaquin as well. But really want to encourage you. It's a quick trip. It's like about a half an hour, 45 minutes away, and this is a good time of year to go because of winter rice flood up. And so
you actually get to see fish move by?
Well, this this is the issue of connecting the floodplain to the Sacramento River, and so it is not yet connected. There would need to be some changes made, but Trout Unlimited is very much involved in this and determining, getting samples of fish food. And bird food. And so right now the birds are using it, and the idea is how to connect it or get those nutrients over to the river.
That's great.
So there's a handout that I'll give you and little bottles of fish food, but I think that it's much better to just go out there in person if you can.
That's great. Yeah, I was sorry I couldn't go. Anything? Just a few things to flag. One is board member Esquivel and I went with Max and some of the DDW staff to meet with the drought task force in Santa Barbara to hear sort of the state of play on Kachuma, but also what they were doing on conservation and the like, and where they needed help to move things. And so that was a good meeting. It was a good check-in considering where they are, and we had a few follow-up issues to deal with that I can't call on right now. And so that was good. But we also had a chance to meet with some folks in the environmental community, and we also had a chance to go to Ventura County and meet with that amazing assemblage of watershed managers there, and go out to the Ventura River and have a meeting in a park by the river talking about everything they've been trying to do. And they've been very prolific in using IRWM and other sources of money over the past, I want to say 10, 15, 20 years. And it was just really nice because you have Ventura in between, and they've just really been doing some great work. So that was nice. Given all the hearing schedule, I haven't spent as much time out in the field with people who are actually doing projects on the ground. It was really good. The other thing I just wanted to flag is that Geeta and her team put together a really good, we called it an EJ Summit, but it was actually a summit, more of a summit with some other people there, but of the drinking water advocacy groups, mostly our staff from all the regions and from DDW, and the purpose of it, and you had staff from DFA, you had staff from all over, to come together and talk about what we've been able to do over the past few years that we've all been together, and prioritize where we need to go next. A lot of discussion about the best ways to engage with community, and some really good panels with our staff talking about what they had learned and how they went out, whether it was how they went out in East Porterville to help get folks hooked up, the folks in Salinas who realized, you have to go to where communities are at convenient times, who went to Mass and had the I think it was the deacon who announced that they were there, and then people talked to them. I mean, just all kinds of sort of best practices and all of that. But it really, very much of a, as always, you always have the, not the specter or the burden, but all of our awareness of how big the lift is in what we're trying to do, but a really wonderful sense of community, of us all trying to bring what tools we have and helping each other get tools to deal with this common objective. So I just wanted to thank all of the staff, Agita and her staff in particular, but also, and Marina Perez did an awful lot of the heavy lifting, but thank the staff who came from the regional, some of whom I did not know, and got a real feel for both the head and the heart that they're bringing to this work, kind of across the board. So it was a really good thing, and the part of the reason it was sort of 2/3, 1/3 is we were very aware that we were asking that the community advocates' time is more precious, but that we really wanted their feedback in developing our priorities together, as opposed to us being in this separate kind of a bucket. I mean, it's a very human and very productive meeting that went really fast. So it was really good. So thanks to everyone who was there, and staff stayed, all day. It was really good. All right. Executive Director's report.
But nothing to add this week.
Nothing to add. All right. What's your favorite thing in it?
Oh, wow.
For you,
Probably
this
the Bay
is
Delta-
really
the-
as good as
the-
it is
the-
for us to give you the overview of everything, not just what ends up on your calendar.
Yeah, well, I always look forward to Bay Delta updates, so, how could it not be my favorite part?
True, it's true. That's right. And we'll wait for Tam's next suggestion on what should be in the executive director's report.
Well, I
Great.
would.
No, thank you for this. It's really useful. And for the staff, I know I've said this periodically, for the staff who give the stuff. I mean, there's a value in doing this all its own, but it's really helpful to us, even if we don't feel the need to ask in a board meeting, because we can individually, sometimes just knowing what's going on is enough to not worry about it. It saves a lot of time with us saying, I need a briefing on X, Y, and Z, whatever happened to X, Y, and Z. And then you see, oh, here, X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, but this would be a good time. If there's anything that you want to see changed, let me know. It's taken me a while to look at it and figure out whether, is it in the right order? Is it the way you guys think about the work of the agency or not? So I've wanted to wait and understand how you all use it as well as how we use it, and then figure out whether there's too much, not enough, right order, not the right order, highlighted, not highlighted. I've looked at the appendix. That's the list of pending projects that needs some work. It's not always up to date, but again, it's a good go-to place for a lot of good things. And I've had some discussions with Member Escobar, who's not here right now, about ways that we can make sure that the important visible most public work of the board is available to both you, staff, and most importantly, members of the public. And we're looking at the report as well as other sources.
Right. Thank you very much. One of the things we'll need to do that we haven't done in a while, now that you're on board, is set one of our regular priorities discussions. We should do that, and we should also do some closed session personnel things so that we can, especially as we get started, so that we can chat with you about how it's going for you, et cetera. All right. We do not have a closed session. We have a hearing officer session. And so with that, I will adjourn this meeting at 12:46, which is much earlier than I thought it would be, but it was a very productive day. So thank you all for all the work that went into it. And have a good Thanksgiving. Travel safe if you are traveling.